The sun rises late and sluggish, as if it too is wary of the day ahead. The morning light slinks through the warped slats of your window like a guilty cat, casting pale strips across the packed earth floor and the corner where your shoes still smell faintly of yesterday's failure. Somewhere outside, a rooster coughs rather than crows, its voice cracked from shouting its warnings into a world that never listens. You're already dressed, though dressed may be too generous a term. What you're wearing is more of an arrangement of cloth, hastily pinned together with intent rather than success. The fabric hangs like damp laundry with the texture of old porridge left in the sun. And still, somehow, it's the nicest thing you own. You scratch beneath the shoulder seam. The wool scratches back. You hadn't meant to find it. You were meant to be pulling weeds. Not noble weeds, not weeds with character. Just the small, spiteful ones that thrive in dry soil and look smug about it. But your fingers brushed something soft, something not a weed, something not known. You recoiled at first, then dug around it like an archaeologist unearthing a curse. The vine had coiled in tight spirals, the leaves aggressive in their confidence. It's in your hand now, and everyone is staring. Your uncle, who hasn't blinked since the last harvest failed, tilts his head like a dog hearing thunder. He grips his walking stick tighter, like he's considering whether tomatoes can be beaten back into the earth. The neighbor with the twitchy left eye mutters something under his breath and steps back, slow and deliberate, as though the fruit might leap at him. Even the goat pauses mid-chew, which is alarming. Nothing stops the goat mid-chew. You glance down at the thing in your palm. It glistens in the light, unnervingly pristine. It's the exact shade of red that suggests bad decisions and bloodletting. The skin is taut, like it's holding something in. Juice, secrets, or spite. You're not sure which. You can feel the weight of it, which is somehow disappointing. You expected it to be heavier, like holding a stone or a sin. But it sits light in your palm, and that makes it worse. Light things should not carry such consequence. Your fingers feel vaguely damp where they touch its skin, like it sweats in anticipation, or perhaps in judgment. The vine end is still attached, a green stem curling out like it's trying to escape whatever's about to happen. You consider dropping it. You consider eating it. You consider just setting it on the windowsill and pretending you've never seen it before. But none of those options feel quite right. So you stand, rooted to the spot, cradling it like a confession. The silence stretches. Somewhere nearby, someone sneezes. A violent biblical sound that seems almost accusatory. It breaks the spell. A voice you don't recognize hisses something about devil's fruit. Another mutters, poison, which is funny, because you've eaten questionable cheese more than once, and no one blinked. But this round red intruder has sent the whole courtyard into a moral spiral. A child starts to cry, though you're not sure if it's because of the tomato or because children just do that. Your aunt crosses herself so aggressively she hits her own chin. You try to look casual. Casual is hard to pull off when your tunic smells like damp hay and guilt. You try to look wise instead, but that just makes your eyebrows hurt. The tomato doesn't help. It does not lend dignity. It lends suspicion. You cradle it more carefully now, like maybe it will behave if you're gentle. It does not behave. It does nothing, which again makes it worse. The goat takes a step toward you. Its hooves clack against the stone in that way that suggests either curiosity or indictment. You back away, unwilling to share your fruit with something that eats its own bedding. The tomato shifts in your hand, and for one terrible moment you imagine it splitting. Seeds and pulp oozing down your arm like the blood of some culinary martyr. You tighten your grip, and it stays whole. Barely. Someone suggests you bury it. Someone else suggests you burn it. One bold soul suggests soup. but they are quickly silenced with a look. You are offered no real guidance. No rituals exist for this sort of thing. At least, none that you've learned. Maybe the Romans had one. Maybe they too stood in the dirt holding a fruit that felt like a mistake. A breeze picks up, brushing past your ears like gossip you're not meant to hear. The tomato remains inert, which at this point feels like passive aggression. You imagine it has thoughts. Judging thoughts. You imagine it knows you don't know what you're doing. You imagine it would laugh if it had a mouth. Maybe it does. You don't check. The sky overhead has turned the kind of gray that promises neither rain nor forgiveness. It just hangs there, pressing down on you like a wet wool blanket. You shift your weight, foot to foot, the soles of your sandals protesting with every creak. The courtyard stones are cold and uneven, worn into patterns by years of pacing and livestock and poor decisions. You're certain this moment will leave its own impression in the ground, one more mark of human confusion baked into the earth. Eventually, you carry the tomato inside. Slowly, as though entering with a relic, you place it on the table. The table wobbles slightly, because of course it does. You stare at the tomato. The tomato stares back, or seems to. It's hard to tell with fruit. You consider covering it with a cloth. You consider drawing a circle of salt. You settle for looking away and pretending it's not there. But you can still feel it, like the echo of a bad idea. Like the knowledge that you've brought something into your home that cannot be returned to nature without consequence. Your cousin eyes it from across the room, her expression the same one she used when someone found a 3-legged chicken last year. She doesn't trust it. She doesn't trust you. You don't blame her. Evening begins to creep in, slow and sticky. The air thickens with cooking smoke and regret. Someone stirs a pot and asks what's for dinner. You don't answer. You wonder if tomatoes are flammable. You wonder if they feel pain. You wonder if, someday, people will find this whole thing funny. You hope not. Your hand still smells faintly of tomato. Sharp, green, faintly metallic. You scrub it with straw, then with vinegar, then with panic. It does not go away. You lie down that night with a blanket that was once beige, but now carries a palette of past meals. You try not to think about the fruit in the other room. You fail. It haunts your dreams. Red, round, watching. And tomorrow you suspect it will still be there, sitting innocently, malevolently, in the same place you left it. Waiting. Waiting for what? You're not sure. You're still holding it. Still staring at it. The tomato. Its skin gleams unnaturally in the morning sun. Too red, too smooth, too smug. You shift your weight awkwardly on the uneven cobbles, trying to look casual, as though this isn't a moment of historical tension masquerading as a fruit. But the longer it rests in your palm, the heavier it feels, as if it has absorbed the weight of suspicion, centuries of culinary distrust, and the kind of blame usually reserved for witches and left-handed children. It does not help that it squishes slightly when you apply the faintest pressure. Not enough to burst, not yet, but enough to let you know that it could, that it's thinking about it, that if you so much as blink wrong, your fingers will be baptized in its questionable juices. It glistens in a way that makes your neighbors look away. Or perhaps it's you they're avoiding. Either way, your hand is starting to itch. The surface of the tomato is taut, like the stretched skin of a smug nobleman's face, glistening with oils and deeply untrustworthy. You've seen plague pustules that looked less ominous. It catches the sunlight like a polished jewel, except this jewel is growing softer by the hour and threatens to stain your tunic with the color of regret. It's the kind of red that doesn't exist in your daily life, not in the muddy linens of market stalls, not in the faded pigments of shrine paintings, not even in your aunt's rosacea after drinking too much fig wine. This is theatrical red, red that announces itself, red that insists it has opinions. And if there's anything your village doesn't like, its produce with confidence. You rotate it slowly in your hand, pretending to inspect it like an educated man might, as if your thumb-to-stem examination will reveal its secrets. It does not. It remains mysterious, unreadable, and, if your aunt is to be believed, demonic. She once claimed a tomato caused her goat to faint. The goat had been dead for 3 days, but she remains firm in her accusation. You sniff it. It smells like green. Not like herbs, but the vague concept of green, like the inside of an anxious plant. It's neither inviting nor repulsive, just unfamiliar in a way that makes your sinuses feel judged. Your tunic clings to your back with the gluey confidence of dried sweat. The midday heat is the kind that makes bread cry and milk rethink its life choices. And you are now too committed to the tomato to abandon it. If you drop it, someone might accuse you of heresy, or worse, wastefulness. In the distance, someone is arguing with a cart. You envy them. You take a step, just one, and the tomato wobbles in your hand like a gelatinous threat. You hold it out a little farther, just in case it explodes, which you now believe is within the realm of possibility. You've read enough saintly anecdotes to know this is how miracles begin, with minor fruit-based trauma and a lot of hindsight. The path to your house is lined with suspicious glances. Children run past, deliberately looking away, as if the tomato's gaze might infect them with opinions. An old woman crosses herself. You think it's for you. You can't be sure. At home, the air is stale with last week's stew and the unshakable scent of damp socks. The family goat, who lives a life of noble disregard, eyes you with her usual expression of passive judgment. You hold the tomato aloft like a gift to a particularly unimpressed deity. She sneezes. You place it on the table gently, as though it might detonate. The wood creaks in protest. The tomato rolls slightly. You stare. It stares back. The knife you fetch is not your best one. You do not trust the tomato with your best knife. It deserves mediocrity. But as you press blade to flesh, there is resistance. A soft tension, like the skin is trying to hold on to its secrets. Then it yields. With a wet sigh. The inside is worse. It's not the blood-like juice, or the pulpy meat, or even the seeds that look like tiny, glistening eyes. It's the texture, the way it clings to the blade like guilt. It doesn't slice so much as slump, like something that regrets being born. You prod the interior with your finger, instantly regretting the decision. The sliminess coats your skin with the persistence of tax debt. You wipe it on your tunic. Now you're part of the problem. And still, you are not brave enough to eat it. You think about the apothecary's stories, the ones whispered after 2 cups of wine and a suspicious rash. Tomatoes, she said, were like little edible curses. Said they curdled blood and disturbed the humors. Said one man tried to eat one and spent 3 days speaking only in rhymes. That might have been syphilis, but the point remains. You stare at your fingers. They smell faintly like anxiety and regret. The tomato has begun to collapse on itself, as if exhausted from its performance. It sags under its own confusion. From the window, the neighbor's child watches you with narrowed eyes. He's eating bread. Dry, sensible bread. You feel judged. Rightly so. You wrap what remains of the tomato in an old cloth and bury it in the compost. It is the closest thing to an exorcism you know. The goat watches the entire ceremony with pointed disinterest. You wonder what she's seen. You suspect it's everything. That night your dreams are strange. You're in a field of red, but it isn't flowers. The scent is both sweet and unsettling. Your feet stick to the ground with each step, the soil clinging like a guilty conscience. There are whispers just beyond the edge of hearing, murmurs of flavor and death. You wake up before anything truly happens, but the sensation lingers, like seeds in your teeth. Morning brings little comfort. The cloth where the tomato once lay now holds only a faint stain, a smear of something that looks a little too much like a warning. Your tunic, marked from your earlier lapse in judgment, carries a ghost of the scent. You sniff it again. Still green. Still tomato. You go to the market, determined to forget. But there, nestled among cabbages and beans, it waits. Another tomato, smirking from its crate, mocking your internal spiral. You walk faster. You buy cabbage. You pretend it's enough. Back home, the air is still thick. The tomato stain on the table has not faded. The goat bleats once, long and low. You sit beside the hearth and contemplate everything you've ever eaten. Nothing has ever looked quite so evil while pretending to be a fruit. The tomato is not food. It is an experience, a political statement, a moral dilemma, a soft red threat. And you suspect this is only the beginning. The day grows long. Your thoughts muddle like overcooked peas. Somewhere, a child drops a melon and blames it on divine punishment. You feel seen. And as you rest your chin in your hand, elbow on the wobbling table, stomach grumbling with cautious boredom, a single thought settles into the dust of your mind. What if someone actually ate one? You shiver, not from cold, from curiosity and dread. The sun sinks low, bleeding red across the walls like a bad omen with artistic ambitions. Somewhere in the garden, a vine trembles with silent judgment. Tomorrow, perhaps, you'll touch one again. Perhaps not. The goat has opinions. But for now, you stare at your stained tunic and wonder whether anything red should ever be trusted. Sleep will come slowly tonight, soft and uneasy, like a tomato rolling off a crooked shelf. And when it does, it will carry the faint scent of something green and just a little bit wrong. The morning after the tomato incident, things feel different, but not because of you. You haven't done anything remarkable except sleep poorly and chew stale barley bread with the jaw of someone twice your age. No, it's the market square. It hums with a strange energy, the kind you can't quite name, but it itches the back of your throat like dust that's pretending to be news. You clutch your cloak around your shoulders, though it doesn't help much. The wind still slips in like a disapproving ant. There's chatter in corners, murmurs behind hands, and glances that bounce like dropped cabbages. And then you hear it again. Another one. Dead. Another wealthy man, pale and cold, and decidedly not buying turnips anymore. The second this week. The fourth this month. You try to look surprised, but it comes out more like satisfaction filtered through fatigue. You weren't fond of him. Or the others, really. You remember him mostly by the sound of his sandals and the way his voice rose 3 octaves whenever a servant spilled wine. His beard was shaped like ambition and smelled faintly of imported oils and contempt. You hadn't expected him to vanish so suddenly, but then again, he'd eaten tomatoes. Not just one, several. Sliced and arranged on pewter plates like daring red coins, drizzled with vinegar and arrogance. You saw it with your own eyes at the feast last week. You weren't invited, of course. You were nearby, scrubbing your hands with cold water and wondering whether the smell was coming from your tunic or your soul. But you saw them, dozens of them, biting into tomatoes like they were made of luxury and not quiet terror. Now, he's gone, and his seat at the forum lies conspicuously empty, like a stain someone tried to scrub away with too much lemon and too little skill. You walk past his house later, though you pretend you're not doing it on purpose. The shutters are drawn. The usual scent of roasted lamb and inflated self-worth has vanished, replaced by the sour musk of morning incense and boiling laundry. You almost feel bad. Almost. But then you remember how he once referred to your sandals as charmingly provincial. Your sandals which have held together through storms, festivals, and one regrettable wrestling match with a goat. So no, you're not sad. You're curious, though. The gossip spreads like mold in a poorly vented pantry. Whispers thread through bakeries, bathhouses, and bread lines. It's the tomato, someone hisses with the certainty of someone who once read a scroll half through and decided they knew everything. It's cursed, foreign, unnatural. A fruit pretending to be a vegetable, red like blood but soft like sin. You nod, slowly, mostly to keep warm. The idea isn't new. People have been suspicious of it since it arrived, from across the sea no less. A gift, they said. A delicacy. The kind of gift that bites back, like a smile from a patrician. Still, it was the rich who ate it. The rest of you? You eyed it the way you might eye a dog that's wagging its tail too enthusiastically next to a ditch. No one trusted it. But the wealthy, they found it fashionable. And now, suspiciously, inconveniently, coincidentally, they're dying. You pass another vendor cart displaying tomatoes like trophies. The seller's smile looks brittle. You're not sure if it's desperation or defiance. There are fewer takers today. A pile of the cursed fruit sits unsold in the weak winter sun, their skins shiny, tight, and disturbingly smug. You narrow your eyes at them and keep walking. At home, you sit on the edge of your stool, chewing something you think used to be lentils. The air is heavy with boiled things and unspoken tension. Your neighbor stops by to borrow vinegar, though she lingers longer than necessary, casually dropping hints like crumbs leading to a conspiracy. Another merchant's son, she whispers, dropped dead in the bathhouse. His last meal? Tomato stew. Coincidence, perhaps. But there's something comforting about blaming food. It's simpler than admitting the city is full of decay and unpredictable fate. Food is easier to avoid. Fate is not. You can skip dinner. You cannot skip destiny. Still, you chew a little slower that evening, just in case. By twilight, the paranoia is blooming like mold beneath a leaky roof. You pass two men arguing in the forum, not about politics or taxes or the usual chorus of dissatisfaction, but about the color red. One swears the tomato is divine punishment for overindulgence. The other insists it's a test, like a culinary riddle that only the wise will survive. You consider offering your opinion, but then remember how that ended last time, with you being mistaken for someone's cousin's debtor and nearly drafted into citrus delivery. So instead, you listen. You absorb. You try to ignore the gnawing sensation in your stomach that feels suspiciously like hunger, but also slightly like dread. You ate a stew last week that might have contained something tomato adjacent. You didn't die. But you didn't exactly thrive either. Later, lying on your straw mat, you think about all the people who are no longer here. The wealthy ones mostly. The ones with gold-threaded tunics and opinions on olive oil. The ones who tasted the tomato first, proudly, loudly, with their heads tilted just enough to remind you they were important. And now, they're silent. It's hard to feel bad. They had their feasts. You had your crusts. They drank imported wines. You drank disappointment with a splash of regret. And now you're both still here, though only one of you is still breathing. Your neighbor's goat bleats somewhere in the distance, long and mournful like it knows a secret. You shift beneath your blanket, which smells like every previous season layered into fabric. Somewhere, someone is still selling tomatoes. Somewhere else, someone is probably eating one with a fork made of silver and hubris. You almost hope they choke on it. But mostly, you just hope they're next. And as the darkness seeps into the corners of your dwelling, wrapping everything in the hushed stillness of almost sleep, you think of red fruit, porcelain plates, and the strange satisfaction of outlasting someone who once called you common. You roll onto your side, the mat creaking beneath you, and exhale slowly through your nose. You survived another day, another tomato-free day. Though tomorrow, well, that's someone else's problem. The morning begins with damp knees. You hadn't planned on kneeling in the mud, but that's where life has deposited you, like so many half-rotten turnips. The sun is sluggish today, peeking through the clouds like it's ashamed to be seen illuminating your garden. A patch of earth that has long since stopped behaving like dirt and more like a bored person experimenting with plant-based practical jokes. The ground is too soft in some places, too hard in others. One part squelches like uncooked sausage beneath your heel, and another resists your hoe like it has ambitions of becoming Roman concrete. You used to take pride in this patch, tilling, sowing, nurturing. Now it's more like a place you visit when you need to feel confused and unappreciated. You lean forward, inspecting the curly thing sprouting near the compost pile. It's green, technically, but it's not a cabbage, not a squash, not anything that seems to correspond to a vegetable you've ever paid tax on. Its tendrils curl like an indecisive snake, and its leaves shimmer slightly in the breeze, like it's trying to wink. You do not trust it. Further along the row, the carrots have gone feral. They've split into odd little fingers, clawing at the soil as if trying to escape the shame of having grown here. The beets sulk beside them, refusing to bulb, just long, sad stems with a hint of crimson embarrassment at the base. Even the herbs, the mint, the parsley, have begun leaning toward the fence, as though they know there's something better on the other side. You envy them, but it's the tomato vines that really concern you. They weren't supposed to be here. You don't recall planting them. No one does. One day there was dirt and the faint possibility of garlic. The next, there were vines, creeping up the stakes, twirling around the base of your watering jug, and edging suspiciously close to your bedroom window. They're redder than anything else in your world. Not the warm red of baked clay or wine gone sour, but an aggressive, glossy red, the sort of red that seems aware of itself. Their skin is smooth and taut, like they've never known hardship. Each one sits on the vine like it's waiting to be noticed or accused. The villagers whisper now, about your garden, about the way it never seems quite right. You've heard the mutterings as you pass, not loud enough to be accusations, but just audible enough to stick to your ribs. Witch's crop, someone called it last week. You had to smile politely, even as the basil turned a suspicious shade of chartreuse overnight. Your neighbor, the one with the eternal cough and judgmental eyebrows, peers over the crumbling wall between your plots. He says nothing, just eyes the tomatoes like they're plotting something. Then he disappears again behind a lattice of overgrown dill, as though retreating from a crime scene. You kneel by the vines and pull at the weeds, even though you're starting to suspect the weeds might be safer than the crops. Your hands come away stained with the dark, musty scent of damp earth, but also something else. A sharp, green tang that clings to your fingers. Tomato stem. It's pungent and proud and entirely too alive. The air is thick. Not warm exactly, but damp, like it has ideas but no follow-through. Somewhere in the distance, a goat sneezes. It's not your goat, but you understand its energy. The vines have begun climbing sideways now, toward the shed. And the shed, like the coward it is letting them. You tried cutting a few vines yesterday, but by morning they'd regrown, and one had looped delicately around the handle of your shovel, as if to say, try that again. There's something smug about them, something almost performative. Other crops wilt and wither and apologize when they fail. These things seem to thrive on spite. They grow in the wrong season, in the wrong direction, with the wrong attitude. And they do it confidently. Your hands are dirty. Your back aches. Your tunic smells of compost and the faint musk of old vegetables trying to reinvent themselves. You think about pulling up all the tomato vines. But you also think about the time you did that with the turnips and how they grew back with double the vengeance. You suspect the tomatoes would not take it personally. They would take it professionally. The soil here has stopped feeling like soil. It feels like something watching you through a thin layer of loam. You press a finger into the dirt near one particularly plump tomato. It yields too easily, and you pull away quickly, suddenly unsure whether you touch the ground or something impersonating it. You glance toward your cottage. The window is open. The vine is closer than it was this morning. You tell yourself it's the wind, but the wind doesn't usually tie itself into a loose knot around your windowsill latch. You stand slowly, knees cracking like poorly constructed scaffolding. The sun is no help, weak and moody, like an underpaid apprentice with a hangover. Your feet sink into the grass as you move toward the path, and even the gravel seems unsure of its loyalty, sliding underfoot in tiny betrayals. The compost heap is quieter than usual, less buzzing, less decay. You wonder if the tomatoes are absorbing the rot, converting it maybe into whatever cursed energy they're storing in their glossy skins. You scratch at your arm. It itches. Maybe from the weeds, maybe from the general sense of being watched. There's a tomato on the edge of your basket now. It wasn't there this morning. You don't remember picking it. But it's sitting there, as if it belongs, as if it has something to say. You do not engage. You water the herbs, even though they're losing the will to be useful. You mutter something about sage and resilience. The sage responds by wilting even harder. Your stomach growls. You consider lunch. You consider cooking. But the kitchen is full of tomatoes. Not placed there. Arrived there. You find one in the flour bin last week. Another inside the lid of the butter crock. One had wedged itself beneath your bedpost, as if nesting. You haven't slept well in days. The vines are beginning to bloom again. Yellow flowers, bright and cheery, like the screams of the cheerful mad. You stare at them too long and feel slightly dizzy. You go inside. You close the door. You pretend the vine doesn't tap gently against the glass like a salesman who doesn't know when to stop selling. Tomorrow, you'll prune. Tomorrow, you'll reclaim your garden. Tomorrow, maybe the sage will stand up for itself. But tonight, you'll sleep with the window closed, the shutters drawn, and the basket of tomatoes outside, far outside, next to the goat pen, where at least something normal still happens. The smell of tomato leaf oil clings to your tunic, and the dirt under your fingernails has a reddish tint. You lie down on your straw pallet, the springs of hay poking through your blanket like guilt. And outside, just beyond your shutters, something continues to grow, softly, slowly, persistently, like judgment with roots. And tomorrow, you will crush one, just to see if it flinches. The morning air has the sharpness of something that's been judging you since dawn. You step out into the garden, your feet stiff in yesterday's shoes, still damp around the edges. The dew clings to your ankles like gossip, cold and persistent, and the sun hasn't quite warmed the earth enough to justify this much exposure to effort. The garden greets you with its usual mess, half-hearted sprouts, weeds pretending to be herbs, and the chaotic ambition of that one vine, the one that seems determined to make eye contact. You didn't ask for tomatoes. You remember this with the kind of certainty usually reserved for crimes and confessions. You never planted them. You never wanted them. You don't even like the idea of them. And yet, there they are, round, plump things that glow a little too eagerly in the morning light, redder than anything else in the garden. Redder than sense, redder than sin. They dangle from the vine like temptation, and each one looks like it knows something about you. You bend toward one, squinting like the proximity might make it less unsettling. It's smooth, shiny, firm with just a hint of give, like fruit, but with a vegetal confidence that says it knows it doesn't belong here. You reach for it, and your fingers hesitate, brushing the skin like you're greeting a sleeping animal you don't quite trust. When you finally pick it, more out of irritation than bravery, it comes off too easily, like it was just waiting for this moment. You stare at it in your hand, weighing it like a moral dilemma. And then, without thinking, or possibly thinking too much, you squeeze. It bursts with a soft pop, spraying pulp and seeds across your palm in a red splatter that looks suspiciously like regret. The juice is thick, clinging, and smells like something that doesn't want to be categorized. It's earthy, yes, but with an acidic edge, a tang of something that lives in the back of the throat and refuses to leave. It smells alive, loud, almost smug, and suddenly, you're not holding a plant anymore. You're holding a mistake that squelches. The skin sticks to your fingers like guilt. The juice runs in thin trails down your wrist. A seed lands between your knuckles and stares up at you like it's daring you to do something foolish. You wipe your hand on your tunic, which already smells like goat, ash, and sweat. So the addition of tomato only makes it worse. A kind of aromatic insult layered over fatigue. You sniff your hand. Big mistake. The scent invades your nose, sharp and green and metallic in the way that only a vegetable with identity issues can manage. It's not the fresh scent of basil, nor the innocent sweetness of an apple. No, this is something more primal, like the memory of a forest fire wrapped in moss. You sneeze, twice, the second time with conviction. Your neighbor leans over the fence. She sees the smear on your tunic, the red on your hand, and raises an eyebrow in the way only someone with 7 sons and a suspiciously thriving herb garden can. You shrug like this happens all the time, but her gaze lingers a moment too long, as if she's trying to determine whether she should call a priest or just avoid borrowing salt from you ever again. Back inside, you try to wash your hands, but the scent lingers in your skin, trapped in the folds like bad decisions. The water from the jug is cold, stinging your fingers, but not enough to distract you from the fact that you can still smell the tomato. It haunts your knuckles. It clings to your nail beds. You scrub with what you think is soap, but might actually be hardened cheese. No change. The tomato wins. The goat smells it too. She sniffs your hand with interest, then turns away in disgust, which is notable, considering she once ate a candle. Even she has standards. You consider that maybe she knows something you don't. You change your tunic, which doesn't help. The scent has colonized your very identity. You sit on the stool in the corner, stare at your stained fingers, and wonder how a fruit, if it is a fruit, can smell so much like defiance. It smells like something trying to pass as food while secretly plotting something else, something personal. Later, you dig through the garden again, hoping to distract yourself with something wholesome. Turnips, maybe, or the kind of root vegetable that accepts its role without drama. But the tomato vine has grown overnight. It's crept over the fence post, leaned into your sage, wrapped a gentle but insistent tendril around the base of your shovel. It's everywhere, flourishing at you. You try to trim it back. You clip one limb, then another, but they curl and fall like wounded soldiers, oozing that same unmistakable scent. Your hands are slick with juice again, and now your forehead is too, because of course you had to wipe the sweat away. You are becoming tomato adjacent. You are a walking accusation. You consider burning the whole thing. You even fetch the bucket of ash from the hearth. But something about the vine's shape, reaching, curling, almost beckoning, makes you pause. It's not fear exactly, more like suspicion mixed with a touch of awe. How does it grow so fast? Why does it look so pleased with itself? You remember the stories, plants that whisper at night, fruits that beckon travelers into trouble. You always thought those were metaphors. You don't anymore. That evening, the scent still trails you like a curse. You lie down on your straw mat, and the tomato smell is in the blanket, in your hair, in your understanding of the universe. You dream of red orbs floating in the dark, glowing faintly, pulsing with knowledge they refuse to share. And when the rooster crows, not out of duty, but apparently just to annoy you, you rise with the weight of someone who knows they will never be clean again. Not truly, not inside. Outside, the tomato vines have flowered again. You don't remember planting them, but they remember you. And somewhere, nestled in the leaves, is one that looks just a little too ripe, just a little too ready, just a little too knowing. You try not to meet its gaze, but tomorrow you'll have to deal with it, because it's not going anywhere, and neither are you. Not until this garden stops screaming in fruit. Not until your hand stops smelling like betrayal. Not until you forget that first pop, wet, warm, and irreversible. And even then, the vine will wait. Quiet, patient, red, ready. It starts with hunger. Not the dramatic kind. Not the chest-clutching epic hunger of ballads and famine legends. But the slow, creeping sort that comes when bread is scarce. Turnips are soft in all the wrong places. And yesterday's stew tasted like someone rinsed despair with dishwater. It's the sort of hunger that arrives mid-morning and refuses to leave. You shuffle around the cottage, pretending not to notice the way your stomach whines like a distant, judgmental dog. But it's there, persistent, unimpressed by excuses. You check the cupboard again, as if maybe your luck has changed since the last 5 times. Numbers still a crust of something you suspect used to be cheese, a few wrinkled beans, and a jar of salt that has formed into a single resentful lump. The goat bleats softly from outside, which somehow feels personal. You sit down on the stool, which creaks under your intent, and you stare at the one thing you've been pretending isn't an option. The tomato sits on the windowsill like a guest who hasn't been invited but insists on being seen. It glows in the gray light, impossibly red, like it's showing off. You didn't place it there. It just appeared, as they always do, nudging into your life with round audacity. You've thrown out 3 this week, buried 1 with the compost, and once, just once, you left one in a basket by the roadside and walked away briskly without looking back. But this one stayed. You pick it up. It's warm from the sun, heavy with consequence. The skin is taut, unblemished, almost glossy, as if it were trying to convince you it had value beyond suspicion. You roll it in your palm like a stolen coin, weighing the price of desperation. You sniff it. The scent is the same as always, green, metallic, with a note of something that doesn't belong in polite company. Not quite rot, but not exactly freshness either. Like a herb that read too many romantic poems and now has ideas above its station. And still, you're hungry. Not enough to gnaw bark, but enough to question your principles. Enough to consider that maybe, just maybe, the devil's fruit might be food. You bite into it. Not daintily, not delicately. You sink your teeth in like a man who's already regretting it and wants to get it over with. The skin gives way with a pop, a wet snap that startles you more than it should. Immediately, your mouth is filled with a rush of flavor that doesn't know how to behave. It's acid first, sharp and intrusive. Then a strange sweetness blooms behind your molars, like someone tried to ferment honey in a vinegar barrel. There's a slippery pulp that slides across your tongue with the texture of overconfidence and seeds. So many seeds. Tiny explosions of bitterness wrapped in lies. Your tongue panics. It tries to retreat, but it's surrounded. Your jaw freezes mid-chew, unsure whether to commit to this betrayal or spit it back into the cruel light. But pride is a powerful seasoning. You keep going, slowly, grimly, like someone walking through a field of mud with their shoes untied. The inside of your cheeks feel raw, like they're being scrubbed with a damp cloth. The roof of your mouth has questions. Your throat, meanwhile, is closing like a suspicious tavern. You swallow the first bite, and the sensation is both slick and defiant, like something alive sliding down, not entirely consenting to digestion. You blink, you cough, you breathe through your nose, and instantly regret it. The smell is everywhere now, in your sinuses, in your thoughts. It has soaked into your memory like smoke in a wool tunic. You take another bite, because now you have something to prove, The second bite is worse. The flavor expands, blooming in your mouth like mold in a pantry. It's not bad exactly. It's not good either. It's complex in the way that makes you question your life choices. It tastes like a fruit trying to be a soup, like a berry that fell in with the wrong crowd. You chew and chew, but the pulp just spreads, smearing its message across every corner of your palate. Your teeth itch. Your gums feel like they've signed up for a cause they don't believe in. You swallow again, this time with less dignity and more resentment. There's a moment afterward where the world slows, not for reflection, but for survival. You sit, motionless, mouth slightly open, waiting to see if you'll live. Nothing happens, which is almost worse. The silence in your gut feels like plotting. You wonder if your stomach is writing a letter of protest. You look at the rest of the tomato, still in your hand, juice pooling in your palm like the remains of a small crime. It stares back, unrepentant. You consider finishing it. You consider hurling it into the fire. You consider planting it in the goat's trough and pretending it never happened. Instead, you place it carefully on the windowsill, a half-eaten orb of misjudgment. It wobbles slightly. You turn away. Your mouth is coated in regret. You drink water. It helps a little, but only just. The aftertaste clings like a bad mood. It's sour and sweet and stubborn, like you once insulted a tomato in a past life, and now this one has come to make amends, violently. Outside, the vine creeps closer to the doorframe. You try to focus on other things, mending a tunic, stirring the fire, pretending to read a book you can't actually afford. But the flavor still haunts you. Your tongue feels like it has betrayed you to a foreign power. Your lips are tingling. Your stomach has begun to mutter. You sit very still, listening, hoping it doesn't escalate. The goat wanders in, sniffs the air, makes a noise that might be sympathy, or maybe warning. You wonder how the rich eat these things with such joy. Maybe their tongues are different. Maybe wealth numbs the palate. Or maybe this is their punishment, disguised as delicacy. By evening, your stomach has stopped complaining, though it hasn't exactly forgiven you. The scent of tomato still hovers faintly in the corners of the room, layered over the smell of damp wood and slightly scorched oats. You lie down on the straw mat and close your eyes, but the flavor is still there, tucked behind your molars like a secret. You run your tongue along your teeth and flinch. A reminder, a warning, a dare. You tell yourself you'll never try one again, but somewhere, in the quiet, your tongue whispers, maybe cooked, and you sleep, uneasily. Red dreams curling at the edge of the night. It starts with a glance, or perhaps a grimace. You're not sure anymore. The priest passes by your garden one afternoon, his robe dusted at the hem with the sort of mud that implies judgment. He pauses, not long, but long enough, and narrows his eyes at the vines curling along your fence like they own the place. One tendril leans toward the path as if to offer a challenge or a confession. You scratch your chin and pretend not to notice, but you can feel the heat of his disapproval like a sunburn you forgot you earned. The tomatoes have grown too well, too quickly, and far too confidently. While your cabbage sulks and your carrots disappear entirely, the tomato vines flourish in ways that feel unnatural. They reach toward the sky with the giddy abandon of something that knows it shouldn't be here and is thriving anyway. Their fruits, those bulbous red orbs, hang heavy like forbidden baubles on a tree that wasn't invited to Eden but showed up anyway and started decorating. And you, poor steward of soil and sin alike, are left wondering how something so cheerful-looking could make you feel this vaguely unclean. That evening, the priest's sermon is louder than usual. His voice rises like a cold wind rattling loose shutters, full of warnings and thinly veiled allegories. He talks of temptations that ripen too easily, of fruits too red, too round, too ready to betray. of creeping things that climb uninvited and take root where they were not sown. You shift uncomfortably in your pew, the scent of tomato vines still clinging faintly to your tunic, despite your best efforts to scrub it out with vinegar and denial. The old woman next to you mutters something about witch gardens and signs herself 3 times. You consider doing the same, but settle instead for a long sigh that tastes of compost and shame. Your knees ache against the stone floor, and you wonder how much sin a fruit can carry before it requires confession or exorcism. Back at home, the garden is restless. The vines have climbed further while you were gone. One has looped itself around the base of the fence post in what can only be described as a territorial gesture. Another is curling upward, almost arrogantly, toward the window. You trim it back with clumsy scissors and the firm disapproval of a man scolding his own eyebrows. The stem oozes a sticky greenish sap that smells faintly like guilt and salad. Inside, your cottage offers no comfort. The straw mattress is uneven again, despite your repeated beatings with a broom handle. The draft that comes in through the western wall has taken on a judgmental chill, as though even the wind disapproves of your horticultural choices. You curl under your scratchy blanket, trying not to think of sermons or vines or sins with seeds. Your goat bleats once, mournfully. She hasn't gone near the garden since the first tomato ripened. She stares at the vines now with the wary eyes of a creature who knows something unnatural when she sees it. You envy her certainty. At least she can choose not to eat them. You, on the other hand, have already tasted one. Just a nibble. It was unsettling. Not bad, not good, just wrong in a way that made your molars twitch and your soul contemplate early retirement. The next day, you notice the priest won't walk past your cottage anymore. He takes a longer route, around the bend, past the widow's goats and the hedge that smells like mildew and secrets. When you try to greet him in the market, he nods without meeting your eyes, as though your presence might stain his cassock, as though you've become a cautionary tale in soft leather shoes. You begin to dream of tomatoes. Not in the pleasant way one dreams of wine or soft bread or warm baths that don't involve buckets. Number. These dreams are warm and pulpy and full of whispering vines. You feel the weight of fruit in your hands, heavy and ripe, and then it pulses like a heartbeat. You wake in a sweat that smells faintly of basil, though you haven't grown basil in months. You visit the chapel anyway, out of habit, out of guilt. The air is thick with incense and judgment. The candles flicker in that uneven way that makes you feel like the saints are watching and disappointed. You kneel on the hard stone and attempt a prayer that does not mention tomatoes. It's harder than you'd think. Your knees crack like dry twigs beneath your weight, and your stomach rumbles in a tone that suggests hunger and regret. When you confess, it's not the tomato you mention. It's the envy. The growing suspicion that the tomato is doing better than you, that the vine has more purpose, that its color is richer than anything in your wardrobe, and its confidence more robust than your last 3 decisions combined. You end the confession feeling oddly ashamed and vaguely inspired. The priest says nothing, just hands you a penance and avoids touching your fingertips. You suspect he knows. By week's end, others are whispering. Not loud enough to be accusations, but enough to be drafty. The baker eyes your hands as you count your coins. The blacksmith's wife calls your stew interesting, in the same tone one might use for a bleeding turnip. Children dare each other to run past your fence. One leaves a potato on your doorstep with a crude cross scratched into it. You're not sure if it's a warning or a suggestion. You try to ignore it all. You tend the vines. You water them carefully, avoiding eye contact. You hum tunelessly to drown out the creeping suspicion that they hum back. You consider naming them, but that feels like a line best not crossed. Naming things makes them family, and you're not ready for that level of emotional commitment to produce. Your hands are always stained now. No amount of scrubbing can remove the faint red shadow that lingers beneath your nails. It's not blood, not really. But it's not blood either. You wear gloves, but they chafe. You wear sleeves, but they ride up. You begin to wonder if original sin came in fruit form, because fruit has a way of sticking around, even after it's gone. One morning, the priest preaches a sermon on rot, on fruit that spoils from within, on the dangers of appearances and the lies of sweetness. He looks directly at you when he says it. Or maybe not. Maybe you just feel seen in the worst possible way. You don't remember much of the rest of the sermon, only that by the end, you're gripping the pew hard enough to leave indentations in the wood in your palms. That night, your goat refuses to sleep inside. She chooses the damp shed instead, curled against a sack of questionable hay. You don't blame her. The cottage smells faintly of tomato again. Not strongly, just a hint, a ghost of a scent. You scrub the counters and the ladle and the space under your fingernails. It doesn't help. You lie awake for a long time, eyes open to the thatched ceiling, listening to the wind scratch at the walls like it's trying to remind you of something you forgot. Outside, the vines rustle without breeze. You can't prove that, but you know it, the way one knows when someone is watching, or when the stew has gone off even before you taste it. Eventually, you drift into sleep, your thoughts tangled with sermons and stems. You dream of a red fruit at the center of a labyrinth. It speaks. You don't understand the language, but the tone is condescending. And somewhere, just outside the dream, the sound of water being poured onto soil, or maybe something else entirely. But in the morning, you will notice the vines have crept closer to the door. And that, of course, is when someone makes a sauce. It begins, as most chaos does, with a smell. Not the usual sharp tang of burning straw or the warm, musty breath of goats crowding too close to the hearth. No, this is something else. It slithers in from the windowsill, seeps beneath the door, and coils around your ankles while you stir the morning porridge. A scent that is foreign, warm, almost inviting, until it's not. At first you mistake it for stew left too long near the fire, some accidental fusion of root vegetables and vinegar. But it clings, it follows, and it grows stronger each day, until even your blanket smells faintly. Red. You hear it from your neighbor first, the one with the wonky eye and a fondness for telling half-truths as whole sermons. She says the cook in the next village has done it. He's boiled the devil's fruit, mashed it, strained it through a linen cloth like it was some holy relic, then poured it, of all things, on bread and cheese. There was garlic, too. People cheered, and then promptly argued about whether they were now cursed. You pretend not to care, but something in you itches. Not your skin this time, that's from the fleas. No, it's deeper, somewhere between your ribs and your sense of moral superiority. You shouldn't want to know. You do. Later that day, when the chickens have been shouted at and the goats have been ushered away from the washing again, you wander down the muddy road toward the edge of the market. Not the main market, the quiet, back edge, where the curious things happen. You don't say you're looking for sauce, but everyone knows. You look too clean to be innocent. You walk like a person hoping to accidentally trip over sin. The cook has a booth now. That's what people are calling it. Really, it's just a bench propped up with anxiety and leftover linen. But there's a line, not a large one, just enough to make you annoyed that you're standing in it. You feign interest in the radishes while you wait. They smell of soil and regret. You don't remember radishes ever being this quiet. You hold the sample in your hand like it might bite. It's on bread, of course, the kind that's too crusty to tear but too soft to trust. The red stuff has sunk into it, leaving a circle of ominous softness. You take a bite. You chew slowly, with the deliberation of someone unsure whether they've just committed a minor culinary miracle or a very specific form of heresy. It tastes warm, sharp, slightly sweet, slightly angry, like sunshine after a bad night's sleep, like sour wine and ambition. The texture is all wrong, smooth and smug, and it clings to the roof of your mouth like an accusation. You want to stop eating. You don't. By the time you get home, your mouth still tastes of afterthought and adventure. Your stomach is undecided. You try not to burp. That night, the villagers are fighting about it. Not you, of course. You're simply listening from your doorway, wrapped in the same scratchy shawl that failed to keep out yesterday's wind. One man insists the cook is possessed. Another calls it progress. A third claims his niece hasn't stopped hiccuping since she tasted it, and someone owes him a chicken. The priest arrives late. His boots are too clean, which makes you distrustful. He looks at the sauce like it personally insulted his theology. There are mutterings. There's finger-pointing. Someone compares it to alchemy. The priest declares no sauce should be red unless it's wine, and even then, only if consecrated and not applied to cheese. You wonder if that's in scripture, or just something he made up to sound taller. Meanwhile, your cousin, the one who once tried to sell eggs dyed with beet juice and called it art, has already begun hoarding tomatoes. You saw him muttering to the vines earlier. You thought he was drunk. Now, you're not so sure. The next morning, your neighbor says the sauce made her dream of dancing goats. You nod. You dreamed of boiling something, but the pot kept filling itself. You're not sure that's better. You avoid the market that day, just in case they've started bottling the stuff. You stay near your garden, which, inconveniently, continues to thrive despite your efforts to ignore it. The tomato vines have grown faster, redder, and a little too coordinated in their lean toward the sunlight. One of them touched your foot yesterday. You're still thinking about it. You try to make dinner, but now everything tastes like absence. You mash beans. You oversalt a turnip. You stare at the bread like it's betrayed you. Eventually you eat standing up, chewing without joy, thinking only of sauce and how it made everything else feel tired. The day after, someone's child sings a song about tomatoes. It has a rhyme, and hand motions. You are terrified. Your aunt drops by unannounced with a basket of crusty bread and a suspicious look in her eye. She doesn't say it aloud, but you both know she's testing you. You serve her onion soup, which is safe, except you made it with the last of the stock, and a single spoonful of the red stuff, hidden beneath layers of denial and time. She doesn't notice, or she does, and chooses peace. You both sip slowly, staring into your bowls like they might confess. That night, you write your will. You're not dying, but it feels like the kind of week where that's just prudent. You don't mention the sauce. Let them figure it out. Your dreams are odd again. Red shapes dance across your vision. One tomato sings in Latin. Another peels itself. You wake with your mouth tasting like you've confessed something. You haven't. Yet. The next morning, the wind shifts and carries the scent again. Richer this time, more confident. It passes through your home like a sermon. You sit quietly, holding a crust of dry bread, remembering flavor. You don't eat. You're not hungry. Or maybe you just don't trust yourself. The pot still lingers by the fire, rinsed clean but never truly innocent. You glance at it often, like it might grow teeth. Outside, the village argues, loudly, passionately, about tomatoes, about sauces, about whether it's blasphemy if it tastes good. You stay inside, but you listen closely. Eventually, the yelling fades into the background, like most things do. Even outrage gets tired. You lie down later than usual, the smell still clinging faintly to your sleeves. You pull your blanket up to your nose, trying to erase the memory of flavor. It doesn't work. The wind sighs through the thatch, and somewhere in the garden, something red shifts in the moonlight. And tomorrow, you think, someone will try to sell it again. Maybe it'll be you. But for now, your bed is firm, your stomach is conflicted, and the world is spinning just a little more red than it did before. And just beyond sleep, something quietly bubbles, like a sauce reheating itself. The quiet that settles after the shouting is not peace. It is hesitation, suspicion, the kind of silence that drips like rain from a cracked eave, slowly, repetitively, with a steady discomfort you can't quite locate until your sock is wet and your patience has molded. After the sauce incident, the village decides not to speak of tomatoes in polite company, which, in your village, includes anyone within spitting distance and sober enough to distinguish a goat from their mother-in-law. You still have a few of them. The tomatoes, not goats or mothers-in-law. The fruit, if one dares call it that. Round, blushing, swollen with secrets, sitting in a wicker basket near the hearth like they belong there, like they haven't caused theological schisms and gastroenterological chaos. You didn't plant them. You just didn't stop them. A sin of omission, perhaps. One the church hasn't named, but you feel it humming in your teeth. You consider burying them. Not dramatically, just pragmatically. But the earth seems too soft for something so smug. The compost pile already looks overfed, and you've heard rumors that the neighbors' pigs have begun refusing anything red. You stare at the basket a long time that morning, your spoon halfway to your mouth, the porridge cold enough to resent you. Eventually, you decide. Not bravely, just inevitably. The market is muddy, as always, with the distinct scent of onions, ambition, and wet wool. You trudge slowly, the kind of slow reserved for people carrying contraband and not entirely sure what the punishment might be. The tomatoes are wrapped in a cloth, tucked into a basket that previously held cabbages. You've arranged them artfully, as if they've wandered there by accident. You hum tunelessly, as though this is normal, as though you are normal. You set up your cart in your usual spot, a slanted patch of ground between the woman who sells turnips and the man who sells knives that couldn't slice warm butter. They nod at you, squint at your basket, and then politely pretend not to see it. Your first customer approaches with the enthusiasm of a child being asked to apologize. She reaches for a cabbage. Then she sees them, the red things. Her fingers recoil like you've offered her a live eel dressed in a petticoat. She says nothing, just backs away, slowly, respectfully, like you've caught fire and she's unsure of the etiquette. The second is not so kind. He stares. You stare back. A bead of sweat rolls down your spine like a priest's disapproval. He points at the basket. You nod. He makes the sign against evil. You try to smile. It feels like your teeth are on vacation and your gums weren't informed. He mutters something about curses and fruit that bleeds, then throws a turnip. Not yours. One from your neighbor's stall. It bounces off your cart with a thunk and lands in a puddle, more offended than injured. The third is a child. You don't see her at first. She's small, quick, and shaped like mischief in a wool cap. She reaches a grubby hand toward the basket. You freeze. Not because you fear for her safety. The tomatoes have not proven violent, just emotionally manipulative. But because she might touch it. And that feels like the beginning of something irreversible. You open your mouth to say something wise, or at least parental. But she sees the red, shrieks like a haunted duck, and bolts. Her mother chases after her, swearing vengeance on anything round and shiny. You reposition the basket, subtly, hide the tomatoes under a few particularly wilted cabbages. It's too late. The damage is done. Word spreads, as word does, quicker than wind and twice as irritating. Soon your cart is a landmark. People pass by just to avoid it. Some make a show of crossing themselves. Others spit near your wheels. You are officially the tomato person. You try not to internalize this, but the cabbage next to the red fruit begins to shrivel like it knows its reputation is at stake. Your neighbor glares. She was never fond of you, but now it's personal. You've brought shame upon your shared stretch of dirt. Her turnips will be guilt adjacent for weeks. A group of teenagers with too many opinions and not enough soap begin circling your cart. They snicker. One dares the others to buy one. No one does. Eventually, one boy tosses a rock. Not at you, at the tomatoes. It misses, hits the wheel. You pretend it doesn't matter, but you spend the next hour tightening the spokes just to feel useful. Lunch comes and goes. You chew on stale bread that tastes faintly of defeat and damp sackcloth. The tomatoes remain untouched, vibrant, innocent, if one squints. You don't. Squinting implies hope. You try to give one away, just one, to a kind-looking elderly woman who smells like lavender and judgment. She smiles, blesses you, then drops it back into your hand with the gentleness reserved for diseased rats. You offer it to a monk. He declines and offers to pray for your confusion. By mid-afternoon, the tomatoes begin to wrinkle. Their skins pull tight, then sag like elderly nobles. Once plump with pride, now suspiciously damp and slightly fragrant. You pretend not to notice. You arrange them artfully again. One rolls off the cart and lands at your feet. It makes a soft, moist sound. A passing dog sniffs it and walks away with a whimper. You stand there for hours, holding on to your pride like a fraying cloak. The wind picks up, slicing through the layers of your tunic with the efficiency of unpaid taxes. Your boots squelch. Your fingers ache. You are alone, surrounded by produce that no longer respects you. At some point, someone throws a carrot. It's not aimed well. It glances off a cabbage. You sigh and pick it up. It's bruised, like your spirit. By the time the sun begins to sulk behind the thatched rooftops, you've sold nothing. Not a single thing. Not even your perfectly acceptable onions. You pack up slowly. The tomatoes go back into the basket, now wrapped with slightly more shame and slightly less linen. On your way home, you take the long path, past the stream, away from the villagers. You stop beneath the willow tree near the crossroads, the one where people leave things they don't want to carry anymore. Old tools, unwanted news, regret. You consider leaving the basket there, but the thought of someone else finding them, eating them, liking them, fills you with a strange blend of protectiveness and indigestion. So you bring them home, back to your cottage, back to the hearth. You place them on the shelf near the bread that's already gone stiff. They glow faintly in the firelight. You swear they look smug. You eat dinner in silence, something beige and forgettable. You stare at the wall, chewing slowly, tasting judgment. That night, as you lie on your mat, curled beneath a blanket that smells of smoke and unresolved decisions, you replay the day. The fear, the stares, the turnip. You wonder if it would have been better to eat them yourself, quietly, secretly. But then you remember the sauce, and the dream, and the Latin. The wind whispers outside, dragging leaves across the roof like fingernails across a wooden confession. You close your eyes. Somewhere near the window, something shifts, softly, redly. And in the morning you think, perhaps you'll cook them. Just a little, just to see, just to know. But that's tomorrow's sin. Tonight you sleep in the company of fruit no one will touch, and thoughts no one will name. And in the next village, they say the Italians are doing something with them again. Something suspicious. It begins with a wheel of cheese and a whisper. You're at the market, pretending not to be cold, fingering the last coin in your pocket like it might magically multiply. Your neighbor, the one who smells like leeks and conspiracy, leans too close to the grocer and mutters a name. Pomodoro. You recognize the word, not from the sound, but from the silence that follows it. The way the cheesemonger freezes mid-cut. The way a chicken seller 2 stalls down stops mid-cluck. There's a communal pause, like the village itself is holding its breath to avoid swallowing the idea. You don't say anything. You just lift the corner of your scarf a little higher and move toward the turnips like they're a safe bet, because they usually are. But the thought burrows in, like a worm in a soft apple. Italy. Tomatoes. Something unholy involving sauce. You don't know what they're doing with them down there, but you know it's probably elaborate and sinful and delicious, in that specific way sins often are. Instead, you lie in bed that night listening to the wind in the thatch and the goat snoring in the corner. You try to think of anything but tomatoes. You think about plowing, about taxes, about that one time your aunt tried to make a pudding from turnip shavings and shame. But still, the image returns. A red, swollen fruit being sliced by candlelight, oil pooling like sin around it. A hand, probably manicured, scattering herbs like a prayer made of scent. You hate that you're curious. You hate that your mouth waters. The next day, you pass the chapel and catch a whiff of something not incense. A roasted smell, tangy, hot. You whip around to look for flames, a fire, a punishment. Nothing. Just the priest, glaring vaguely into the distance, as if he too has smelled something foreign and unforgivable. You want to ask if tomatoes have officially been condemned yet, but you already know the answer. They haven't. Not out loud. Not yet. You don't receive many letters. That would require friends who write, and a postal system that doesn't consider goats acceptable couriers. But somehow, a message arrives. It's crumpled, grease-stained, and smells faintly of fennel. Your cousin in the city, the ambitious one who owns 2 tunics and talks like he's auditioning for sainthood, has written. He's in contact with an Italian merchant now, he says. A man who speaks in flourishes and cooks with passion. You don't know what cooking with passion means, but it sounds exhausting and dangerous. The letter mentions a sauce, one that makes fish taste less like despair and more like a good decision. You reread that line 5 times. Your fish has never tasted like a good decision. It usually tastes like damp punishment. You fold the letter and hide it beneath your mattress, where things go to fester. You try to ignore it. But that evening, the stew tastes different. Not better, just suspicious. There's an unfamiliar sweetness under the usual salt and resignation. You glance across the table at your sibling, who's chewing too casually. You narrow your eyes. They avoid your gaze. You keep eating anyway. Because it's cold, and the fire is mostly smoke, and your bones hurt like they always do, and something inside you, traitorous and small, wants the taste again. Wants it despite not trusting it. Wants it like the dog wants warmth, even from a hand that might swat. You chew slowly, trying to convince yourself it's just overripe turnip. It isn't. You know it isn't. The next morning, you find a single tomato, glossy and smug, sitting on the windowsill. No one admits to placing it there. You don't touch it. But it sees you. You start hearing things. Not voices, not yet, but whispers from travelers passing through. The kind of men who smell like foreign flour and wear boots too clean to trust. They speak of Naples and something called pomodoro. They say the word like it's a song, like it's an answer, like they've found the one thing that makes their crusty bread worth chewing. You listen from the shadows of your local tavern, pretending to scrub a mug, but mostly absorbing the horror. You picture it. Sun-drenched vineyards, olive oil poured with reckless joy, and tomatoes simmering slowly in pans kissed by fire instead of scorn. It's unnatural, decadent, southern. Here, things are boiled into submission or salted until hope is an afterthought. Here, stew is a survival tactic, not a cuisine. So when you hear that the Italians have started singing about their sauces, something inside your ribcage stiffens. You didn't think tomatoes could be seductive. But apparently, south of the mountains, people are pairing them with herbs, with bread, with cheeses that haven't been judged by the bishop. One man says they make dishes that taste like summer. You're not even sure what summer tastes like. Maybe less damp? Maybe more betrayal? You squint toward the southern horizon as if you can see the scandal rising over the hills. But it's just a fog bank, and your neighbor's chimney belching out the smell of burnt cabbage. Still, the image stays with you. Somewhere, someone is dipping crust into something red, warm, and fragrant, and they're smiling about it. You don't trust that smile. You try to forget what you've heard. You really do. But kitchens have long memories, and yours has started whispering in tomato. It begins subtly. Your neighbor's wife adds something to her barley mash, something that makes the pot steam differently, more confidently, as if the food inside knows it doesn't deserve to be punished. Then there's the innkeeper's boy, who carries crates with a suspicious red residue on his sleeves and hums foreign tunes with too many vowels. Even your own hearth seems to hesitate when you drop in the usual ingredients, as if the fire itself is judging your choices. You try to hold the line. You slice turnips aggressively. You mash garlic until it weeps. You roast onions until your eyes sting with the righteous fury of tradition. But no matter how much you sweat and stew, everything you make tastes like absence, like something's missing, like a meal waiting for a confession. You stare at your mortar and pestle as though it's conspiring against you. There's a smear of something red on the rim. You didn't put it there. You never would. But there it is, glistening slightly, smelling faintly like sin. When you scrub it away, it resists, clings like guilt to fabric. You use ash, salt, and even the rough edge of a broken pot, but it lingers, a faint smear in the shape of a circle, a tomato halo if you're being poetic, or blasphemous. That night, the kitchen feels louder. The crackle of the fire sounds smug. The wood smoke curls like it's trying to spell something. You throw a log on just to shut it up. It comes to you by accident, or so you tell yourself. Folded into the corner of a fishmonger's ledger, the recipe is scribbled in hasty ink. Half Latin, half temptation. You shouldn't be able to read it, but you do. The words rise off the parchment like steam from a forbidden stew. Crushed fruit, olive oil, something green and smugly herbal. Heat it slow, stir counterclockwise, and don't ask questions. That's the tone of it. Not instructive, but daring. Like the recipe dares you to cook it and live with what follows. You read it twice. The second time, the ink seems warmer. You hide it behind the wall near your hearth, beneath the loose stone where you used to keep dried mushrooms, before the damp turned them into a moral dilemma. The parchment fits too easily there, as if it's been waiting for the spot, as if it knew you'd fold. For days, you go about your chores like someone not keeping a secret. You water the garden and do not glance at the tomato vines, even when one of them seems to nod. You feed the goat and ignore the way it sniffs the hem of your tunic, as if you now smell faintly of treason. But every evening, as the sky darkens and the hearth crackles, your fingers itch for that scrap of parchment. You imagine the oil shimmering in the pan, the garlic sighing under the press of your knife, the forbidden fruit breaking down into a soft, fragrant mess that coats your spoon and your conscience. The recipe has become a thought you can't swallow, a hunger just behind your ribs, the kind of appetite that isn't for food at all. It comes to you by accident, or so you tell yourself. Folded into the corner of a fishmonger's ledger, the recipe is scribbled in hasty ink. Half Latin, half temptation. You shouldn't be able to read it, but you do. The words rise off the parchment like steam from a forbidden stew. Crushed fruit, olive oil, something green and smugly herbal. Heat it slow, stir counterclockwise, and don't ask questions. That's the tone of it. Not instructive, but daring. Like the recipe dares you to cook it and live with what follows. You read it twice. The second time, the ink seems warmer. You hide it behind the wall near your hearth, beneath the loose stone where you used to keep dried mushrooms, before the damp turned them into a moral dilemma. The parchment fits too easily there, as if it's been waiting for the spot, as if it knew you'd fold. For days, you go about your chores like someone not keeping a secret. You water the garden and do not glance at the tomato vines, even when one of them seems to nod. You feed the goat and ignore the way it sniffs the hem of your tunic, as if you now smell faintly of treason. But every evening, as the sky darkens and the hearth crackles, your fingers itch for that scrap of parchment. You imagine the oil shimmering in the pan, the garlic sighing under the press of your knife, the forbidden fruit breaking down into a soft, fragrant mess that coats your spoon and your conscience. The recipe has become a thought you can't swallow, a hunger just behind your ribs, the kind of appetite that isn't for food at all. You don't even notice the goat until halfway through your third bite. It's the sound first, a huff, then a snort, then the sort of deliberate silence only possible from a creature that wants you to feel observed. You glance up, sauce still staining your lip, and there she is, your goat, the only soul in your life more judgmental than your cousin and marginally less clean. She stares with the unwavering intensity of a creature who's seen you eat turnip peels off the floor and now cannot understand why this is the moment you've chosen to develop standards. Her eyes follow the spoon as it rises again, slow and guilty. You chew with exaggerated innocence, pretending it's something else. Porridge, perhaps, or shame flavored with basil. She is not fooled. You try to explain, mostly to yourself, that this isn't liking the tomato. It's testing the tomato. You're defending the village in a way, taking the risk so they don't have to. Except no one asked you to, and the goat certainly didn't authorize this mission. Her ears twitch like she's considering reporting you to the priest. The worst part is, the goat has seen your other meals. She knows what your normal dinner looks like: burnt barley, tired root vegetables, something gray pretending to be meat. Tonight, she sees richness. She smells decadence. She smells betrayal. You turn your back to her, but the discomfort doesn't leave. It's not the heat from the food or the lingering acid on your tongue. It's the eyes, the hairy, rectangular pupiled judgment of someone who once watched you trip over your own pants and has never let it go. You finish the bowl in silence, pretending it's penance. You don't even notice the goat until halfway through your third bite. It's the sound first, a huff, then a snort, then the sort of deliberate silence only possible from a creature that wants you to feel observed. You glance up, sauce still staining your lip, and there she is, your goat, the only soul in your life more judgmental than your cousin and marginally less clean. She stares with the unwavering intensity of a creature who's seen you eat turnip peels off the floor and now cannot understand why this is the moment you've chosen to develop standards. Her eyes follow the spoon as it rises again, slow and guilty. You chew with exaggerated innocence, pretending it's something else. Porridge, perhaps, or shame flavored with basil. She is not fooled. You try to explain, mostly to yourself, that this isn't liking the tomato. It's testing the tomato. You're defending the village in a way, taking the risk so they don't have to. Except no one asked you to, and the goat certainly didn't authorize this mission. Her ears twitch like she's considering reporting you to the priest. The worst part is, the goat has seen your other meals. She knows what your normal dinner looks like: burnt barley, tired root vegetables, something gray pretending to be meat. Tonight, she sees richness. She smells decadence. She smells betrayal. You turn your back to her, but the discomfort doesn't leave. It's not the heat from the food or the lingering acid on your tongue. It's the eyes, the hairy, rectangular pupil judgment of someone who once watched you trip over your own pants and has never let it go. You finish the bowl in silence, pretending it's penance. You think about writing to someone, a monk perhaps, or a distant cousin who once owned a spoon from Naples. You imagine the letter in your head because parchment is too precious, and quills are for people who know how to spell concoction without biting their tongue. But if you did write it, you'd start with something polite, something non-committal. Perhaps, "Dearest, whatever your name was, is it true you people are cooking the fruit of dread? Kindly advise." And then you'd wait. Except there's no address to send it to, and even if there were, your village courier has a lazy eye and a lazier mule. The last message he carried arrived 4 months late and partially eaten by whatever lives in saddlebags. Still, it comforts you to compose the letter in your mind, over and over, like a protective spell against curiosity. Because you are curious. Deeply, uncomfortably curious. What are they doing to make it taste safe? Why do they heat it instead of hiding it? Why does every account of these sauces come with a suspicious amount of eye closing and lip smacking? It sounds like sorcery. Or worse, pleasure. But you don't say any of this out loud. Instead, you chop a turnip into quarters and whisper something about honest root vegetables as you drop it into your soup. The soup remains tasteless, but your suspicions do not. They come at night now, not in the pleasant way, like warm bread or your favorite blanket that still smells like the fire. Number. These dreams are full of red glisten and a sense of betrayal. You're standing in a kitchen that isn't yours. Stone counters too clean, bowls too symmetrical, and light that flickers in a shade too golden to be trusted. There are no people in the dream, only hands. Dozens of them. Slicing, stirring, mashing, and all of it with tomatoes. Bowls of them. Bowls upon bowls. The red of them is endless. It glows with a glisten that feels judgmental. You want to walk away, but the floor is sticky with pulp. Every step sounds like guilt. You wake up with your hands curled, as if they've been holding something soft and round and disapproving. The scent clings to your nostrils like a secret. It isn't really there. No one else can smell it. But it follows you. It haunts your sleeves and your fingernails. You swear you hear a squish when you knead the dough in the morning. Not a normal one. A tomato squish. Wet. Confessional. Like something alive admitting its crimes. You spend the day muttering about evil, and the goat gives you a look that implies this is not new behavior. You dig in the garden again. Not to plant. Not to harvest. Just to check. The vines are where you left them. Still tangled. Still smug. They look well fed, even though you've given them nothing. You swear one is leaning toward the sun like it's in love with it. That feels suspicious. Sun-worshipping fruit. The kind of thing that gets people cursed. Or worse, invited to a dinner party in Florence. The cloth merchant returns after a long absence, his mule slower than memory, and his teeth somehow browner than before. He smells faintly of mildew and cinnamon, which, in the hierarchy of smells that visit your village, is actually rather pleasant. As usual, he sets up beneath the creaking sycamore near the well, unrolls his bolts of faded linen, and begins murmuring tales with the same dramatic flair he uses when announcing sock discounts. But today, it's not wool that excites the villagers. It's tomatoes, or rather, the Italian tomato dish. A sauce, he says, redder than blood, richer than sin, served warm over something flat and boiled. He lingers on the word simmered like it's scandalous. You watch your neighbor's eyes widen like he's seen a ghost wearing pants made of flavor. You press closer. You don't want to care, but you do. The merchant describes it with gestures too elaborate for soup. He waves his arms, mimes crushing things, sprinkles imaginary herbs into the wind like a man who's definitely never cooked a real meal. The way he says olive oil makes it sound illegal. You don't trust him, but you do want to know what simmered means. Later that evening, you catch yourself holding one of your garden's accursed fruits and whispering the word under your breath. Simmer. It feels forbidden, like chanting a minor heresy or admitting you've enjoyed something once. The fruit doesn't answer, but it looks slightly more confident than before. A few days later, your neighbor, yes, the one who believes turnips can hear gossip, decides to replicate the Italian miracle using only the vague instructions of the cloth merchant and an alarming amount of overconfidence. You hear him hacking at wood before dawn. You smell burning long before the fire is intentional. And by mid-morning, the entire village has gathered outside his door, drawn in by the potent aroma of culinary hubris. You loiter at the edge of the crowd, arms crossed, face cautiously disapproving. The pot he's using looks like it once held lie, or maybe regret. Inside it, the tomatoes bubble in a way that suggests discomfort more than flavor. He's thrown in herbs, which you suspect may include weeds from his fence line. A child identifies dandelions. No one corrects her. The result is a reddish sludge with the texture of mashed pennants. He offers it around with a smile that dares you to judge him. You do. Internally. Thoroughly. But because public shame is best served in silence, you take a small spoonful, brace yourself for divine retribution, and taste it. It's not bad. It's worse than that. It's almost good. And that is far more terrifying. Your tongue doesn't recoil. It doesn't love it either. It simply considers the flavor, shrugs once in existential confusion, and goes quiet. You chew slowly, like each bite is a theological argument you weren't trained to interpret. The warmth spreads through your chest, but it doesn't bring comfort. It brings possibility. And in this village, that is practically a criminal offense. You hand back the spoon and step away, nodding as if in approval. Secretly, you are sweating. Not from heat, from consequence. That night you sit by the hearth with a bowl of your usual stew, something beige and unremarkable, cobbled together from root vegetables, modest regret, and the sort of meat that requires explanation. But the spoon hovers midair. Something is missing. Something you didn't know you craved until today. You lower the spoon and look into the fire, as if the flames might offer moral guidance. Instead, they flicker with indifference. A small red fruit sits on the shelf above the hearth. It's one of the round ones. The ones you told yourself you'd never touch again. It's slightly wrinkled now, as if it too has been watching. Waiting. Your stomach offers no judgment. It simply growls, long and low, like a disapproving dog that still wants dinner. The stew tastes like dust and compromise. You eat it anyway, slowly, chewing each bite with the dedication of someone being punished gently but thoroughly. But your thoughts betray you. They drift toward what that tomato could have done to this meal. A little tang. A little brightness. A little something besides rutabaga and internalized fear. You frown at your bowl and keep eating, because tradition is stronger than flavor, and repentance takes the shape of blandness in this house. The tomato watches from the shelf. You pretend not to notice. It starts as a low tune drifting across the hedgerow. A few notes at first, lazy, lilting, and smug. It doesn't sound like your neighbor's usual muttering about mildew or goats in the grain again. No, this is different. It's melodic, purposeful. It might even be content. You shuffle to the edge of your garden and peer through the brambles. There she is, hands in the dirt, apron dusted with flour, face suspiciously serene. Something bubbles in a pot beside her, steam curling into the air like a secret trying not to escape. You sniff. It smells complicated, not like your food, which always hovers somewhere between boiled and regrettable. This smells layered, balanced, fragrant in a way that makes you question your own moral compass. There's something red on her chopping board. She sees you watching. She doesn't stop humming. You nod in a way that's meant to be neighborly, but ends up feeling more like a threat. She lifts a wooden spoon, tastes from it, and closes her eyes for just a second too long. She's enjoying it. Too much. You withdraw, muttering about the dangers of foreign influences and culinary heresy. But the smell follows you. It clings to your tunic. It lingers on your skin. And when you lie down that night, it visits your dreams, soft, warm, and red. You never trusted her anyway. The paper is crinkled and smudged with loopy script and a faint stain that smells faintly of anchovy. It's from your cousin's friend's brother's merchant contact who swears he saw something life-changing being served in a Naples tavern. He couldn't remember what it was called, only that it involved tomatoes, garlic, and a level of joy that felt legally questionable. You stare at the letter like it's cursed. Then you fold it carefully and tuck it under the table leg where the floor dips. A useful fate for something so emotionally unstable. It holds up the wobble just fine, which feels appropriate. A document like that shouldn't sit flat. And still, those bright red fruits hang in the garden with the smug patience of something that knows it'll win eventually. You turn your back on them, but their warmth follows you, like a pot left too close to the hearth. Not dangerous, just insistent. Like they're waiting for their moment, and Italy, somehow, is giving it to them. You've never trusted the Italians, not out of malice, that would take too much effort, but out of an instinctual suspicion reserved for people who seem entirely too comfortable with flavor. They sing while stirring pots. They dress their food in oils and herbs. They speak in tones that make bread sound like poetry. It's unsettling. You've spent your life chewing bread that tastes like bark and boiling roots until they confess their bitterness. Meanwhile, across the mountains, they're writing ballads about cheese and swearing oaths to basil. It's the singing that unnerves you most. No one who sings while cooking can be trusted. Cooking is supposed to be grim, a battle against the blandness of survival. You stir because you must, not because the act brings joy. Joy, like spices, is something you can't afford. But in Italy, rumor says they toss tomatoes into bubbling pots like they're tossing coins into a fountain, grinning, humming, letting the juices run riot. Someone even claimed they smashed them on purpose, for flavor. That sounds like heresy disguised as hospitality. And worse still, they're naming the dishes. Giving identity to food is the kind of behavior that leads to pride, and pride leads to indulgence, and indulgence, you're fairly certain, leads to tomatoes in everything. You tried asking the traveling peddler if he'd seen it with his own eyes. The tomato boiling, the sauce making, the olive oil dripping onto warm bread like some kind of edible sin. He nodded solemnly, then offered you a taste of something he called sugo. You didn't know what sugo meant, but it sounded untrustworthy, like a word that requires candlelight and unbuttoned collars. You declined politely. He shrugged and licked it off his thumb. The audacity. Still, the idea wriggles into your brain like a worm through old cabbage, a sauce made from the fruit you've been treating like a moral dilemma. Not a stew, not a soup, but a sauce. A purpose-built liquid, not for survival, but for flavor. Your pantry does not contain flavor. It contains grudges and turnips. That night, you catch yourself looking at your own tomato vines in a different light. They hang heavily in the moonlight, round, gleaming, redder than guilt. You imagine them crushed under a wooden spoon, sizzling in a pan, simmering into something fragrant, something Italian. You shiver and pull your cloak tighter. This is how corruption begins. In the morning, you try to return to normal, a porridge that tastes like defeat, bread that has seen better centuries, and a neighbor who thinks your goat is cursed. But the thought of that Italian sauce follows you like a whisper behind the ear. You stir your gruel, watching it plop and steam with the charisma of wet gravel, and something inside you mourns. Not for the gruel, but for your lack of options. You try to distract yourself with your usual chores, chasing geese, cursing at weeds, moving damp firewood from one useless location to another. You gather eggs that are always slightly warmer than expected, always slightly dirtier than hoped. But no matter what you do, your mind keeps wandering back to that description. Crushed tomatoes, olive oil, herbs. Not survival food, not famine fuel, but food for pleasure. You feel judged by your own garden. The tomato vines lean a little closer to the path. The leaves flutter when there's no wind. One particularly plump fruit dangles just at eye level, as if offering itself like a dare. You stare at it too long. It stares back. You pluck one of the riper ones with a reluctant hand, feeling its skin press back. Not soft, not firm, just indecisive, like a fruit that hasn't made up its mind whether to nourish you or ruin your week. It smells stronger than you remember. Sharp, green, almost medicinal. Like a hedge witch's pantry collided with a summer thunderstorm. You hold it at arm's length the entire walk back to your door, as if that distance will protect your soul. Inside, the air is thick with stale herbs, drying socks, and someone's boiled cabbage experiment. The tomato does not belong here. You set it on the table, and it gleams smugly in the low light, the way only something truly confident or truly cursed can gleam. Your cousin eyes it like it might roll off the table and bite someone. The goat snorts and leaves the room. You do not cut it. You do not eat it. You do not cook it. You merely exist in its presence, and that feels like enough transgression for one afternoon. You back away slowly, as though it might explode into song or judgment. The ideas are getting louder, not just the ones inside your head, which are always a quiet mutter of hunger and aching knees, but the ones in the village square, drifting in with the traveling friars and men in cloaks too clean for farming. They speak in metaphors and Latin, which is the same thing, really. They say the world is changing. That knowledge can be harvested like barley, refined like salt, and passed around like fleas at a summer fair. You listen, sort of. Mostly because you're already in the square, buying cabbage that looks like it lost a bar fight. The cabbage seller is nodding solemnly as a man with a scroll explains that science will banish fear. Fear, of course, being the thing you felt last night when your firewood popped unexpectedly and you thought it was the devil entering through the chimney. You're skeptical. Not of science, but of anything that arrives rolled up and tied with a ribbon. And still, you try to believe. It would be nice, wouldn't it? If everything had a reason. If the plague had a footnote. If your missing left boot was not a sign of witchery, but merely bad string. But belief is a stiff thing to chew, like undercooked rye. So you chew anyway, grimacing as the man with the scroll continues. Behind him, a tomato vendor is setting up a cart. He's new. He's foolish. He's brave. Possibly all three. The tomato sits there. Just one. A test subject. Too round, too red, too smug. You squint at it. It's the same tomato you saw last week, or its twin. They're hard to tell apart, like suspicious neighbors or jury members. The Enlightenment, they say, means asking questions. But no one's asking about the tomato. Not the friar. Not the scroll man. Not even the cabbage vendor, who has opinions on everything, including how to properly salt a foot wound. You decide to test your own hypothesis. If the Enlightenment is real, someone should speak up about the tomato. No one does. You clear your throat. Loudly. The kind of theatrical throat clear that demands attention. You point to the tomato and raise an eyebrow, which you practiced in the mirror this morning. Nothing. No response. A breeze picks up. A chicken walks by. The tomato glows faintly in the sun, like it knows it's being ignored on purpose. You think about taking it, just to see what happens. The Enlightenment demands bold inquiry after all. But bold inquiry doesn't grow back eyebrows if the tomato turns out to be cursed. So instead you stare at it, harder. It doesn't blink. Later that evening, you sit by the fire and reread a page someone gave you, titled On the Nature of Rot. It was printed in a place called Paris and smells like candle wax and ambition. It explains that decay is merely transformation, that death is not evil, but necessary, that nothing is truly destroyed, just rearranged. You glance over at your table, where a tomato now sits, not the one from the market. No, this one is yours, picked from your own vine. Its skin is taut and unwrinkled, suspiciously youthful. You prod it with a spoon. It jiggles in place. Not a good jiggle. The jiggle of bad intentions held together by surface tension. You decide not to eat it. Not yet. Maybe tomorrow, or next week. You want to believe in the Enlightenment, but not enough to test your digestive system's tolerance for philosophy. Sleep comes slowly that night. The wind hisses through the shutter slats. Your bed creaks like it's judging you. You try to remember a single Enlightenment thinker who mentioned tomatoes. Nothing comes to mind. There were pages on reason, on sensation, on empiricism, but not one mention of seeds that stick to your fingers like guilt. You dream of a lecture hall. There are rows of scholars, all wearing ruffled collars and skeptical expressions. On the lectern sits a tomato. The scholars argue in French. You don't speak French, but you understand disappointment. Eventually they nod, pack their notes, and leave the tomato behind. You wake with a headache and the faint scent of vinegar in your nose. Your cousin has started pickling again. He says it's for preservation, but you suspect it's a personality trait. Out in the field, the tomato vines have stretched even farther. They now coil around the fence post like they're plotting an escape or a revolution. One tendril points due south, toward Italy. You try to ignore it. You pull weeds with extra force, taking out your confusion on innocent dandelions. But it lingers. That feeling. That not quite fear. The Enlightenment tells you it's irrational, that it's just a plant. But it also told you the stars are rocks, and bloodletting is optional. So you hedge your bets. By midday, you hear that the village scribe has started using tomato ink. It stains his fingers red, and he claims it makes the words more passionate. The priest refuses to read anything written in it. The nosy neighbor says it's a gateway to sorcery. Your goat wisely eats the manuscript. The tomato at home begins to soften. You prod it again. The skin yields slightly, like a confession. You feel guilty. For what? You're not sure. Evening comes wrapped in mist. You eat soup that tastes like resignation and barley. Your sibling makes a comment about how everyone's trying new things now, like bathing and secularism. You nod, thinking about the tomato quietly decaying on the shelf. It hasn't moved, but it feels like it's waiting. The Enlightenment promised clarity. Instead, it's given you new questions, and a rotting fruit with charisma. You lie in bed, one eye open, ears tuned to the silence that comes just before something strange begins. Tomorrow, you think, you'll go into the village and ask again. Ask louder. Ask about tomatoes and what it means when no one answers. And as you drift toward sleep, the thought settles over you, warm and uncomfortable, like a quilt made of wet parchment. If no one questions the tomato, perhaps it's not because they trust it. Perhaps it's because they're afraid of what it might say back. It begins with a smell. Not an offensive one, not at first, but a smell that doesn't belong indoors. Damp and green, like wet leaves crushed underfoot, or the inside of a clay pot that's forgotten what dryness feels like. It reaches your nose as you pass your cousin's cottage, trailing along the air like gossip wearing moss for perfume. A leafy, stalky smell, tinged with something faintly sweet and unnervingly hopeful, like a meadow trying to flirt. You try to ignore it. There's already too much on your mind. The goat is limping again. Your firewood is spongy with hidden rain. And the Enlightenment, which was supposed to explain everything, has only made it harder to pretend you don't notice how many things are red now. Still, the smell is persistent. It clings to your clothes after brief visits, like the smoke from a suspicious candle. And when your cousin invites you in, always too cheerfully, always with that odd gleam behind the eyes that makes you nervous around baked goods, you finally see it. The windowsill. Not just any windowsill. His windowsill. It is no longer a ledge. It is a shrine. A sacred altar of terracotta and damp linen. There are pots, several, all mismatched, as if the pots themselves disagreed on how they ended up here. In each one, a tomato plant sways with the arrogance of something that's been allowed indoors despite being a vegetable, which, depending on whom you ask, it might not be. You stare. The tomatoes are small, round, glossy. They do not blink, but they look like they want to. Your cousin offers you something called sun-warmed puree. You decline. You don't like your food to sound romantic, especially when it came from a window that gets exactly 1 hour of light a day and faces the side of a barn. He explains, a bit too quickly, that growing them indoors is practical, that warmth is more controllable, that storms can't snap stems inside, that everything is better under supervision. He says all this while adjusting a small woolen scarf wrapped around the base of one of the pots. You don't know whether to be concerned or impressed. You settle on cold and itchy. It's not normal. That's what you tell yourself. Vegetables belong outside, scrapping with the weather and occasionally growing sideways like good, honest peasants. Indoor plants are herbs, decorative, harmless. Tomatoes are not harmless. They are ambiguous. Still, you find yourself visiting again, not out of curiosity, certainly not out of affection, but because someone needs to witness what your cousin is doing before it spreads, before other people start tucking tomatoes into their parlors like sleepy cats. You imagine a future where every hearth has a pot of glowing red suspicion next to the kindling basket. It chills you. The cottage is always damp now. The ceiling drips occasionally, as though the plants are exhaling too much moisture. Mold has begun forming hieroglyphs on the plaster. The goat refuses to enter, which you count as wisdom. And your cousin, who once complained endlessly about root vegetables, now speaks of blossom yield and fruiting time, like he's rehearsing for a courtship. One day, you spot him whispering to the plants. You pretend not to notice, but the whispering stops when you walk in. The tomatoes look shinier than they did yesterday. You feel watched, in a way that doesn't involve eyes. A knowing kind of pressure, like a priest's silence before confession. Later that evening, you sit by your own fire, chewing stale crust and trying not to think about what happens if someone starts naming them. You've already seen your cousin mutter as he spritzes the leaves. You suspect he has favorites. You suspect they know. It gets colder. The wind has changed direction, the way it always does when your joints start aching and your sibling starts muttering threats at the chamber pot again. You bank the fire carefully, layering coals like secrets, hoping it holds until morning. Outside, frost laces the vines. Not just the ones in your own miserable garden, but the ones sneaking across the windowsill at your cousin's place, pressing against the glass like hungry children. Except tomatoes don't need warmth in quite the same way. They absorb it, store it, reflect it back like smug little suns. The villagers begin to whisper, not just about tomatoes, but about him, the one with the glowing window, the one whose cottage smells of basil and wet parchment, the one whose tomatoes don't rot, even when the bread does. Someone says they saw a tomato with a tiny crown of frost inside the glass, and it didn't melt for hours. Someone else says he caught a fever just by breathing near the leaves. You try not to believe any of it. You're reasonable, enlightened. You read half of Why Smoke Rises, and even underline some parts. You understand the difference between real and ridiculous. But you still wipe your boots extra hard after stepping near the vines. And you still don't let your goat wander near the window. Your cousin, for his part, seems proud. Not smug, exactly, but content. The way a man does when he knows something you don't. He started giving small jars to people, red things, sealed tightly, with strange herbs floating inside like pickled thoughts. He says it's tomato essence, and that it makes stews taste like memories. You don't ask whose. At night, your own pantry feels inadequate. You stare at your dry onions and wonder when they became boring, when flavor became suspicious, when curiosity started coming in jars. You tell yourself it's a phase, that your cousin will tire of it, that mold will do its work, that someday you'll walk past his windowsill and find it empty again, just a plain ledge, holding nothing more than dust and failed dreams. But it doesn't happen. Instead, the plants grow. And not just up. They reach sideways, down, around. The pots cannot contain them anymore, so he started letting them trail across the floor. Carefully, respectfully, as if they deserve the space, as if they earned it. You visit less frequently, not out of fear, certainly not out of fear, but because the cottage is crowded now. Not with people, just presence, thick and leafy, and red. Always red. Eventually, you hear that someone 3 villages over has started growing them too. Indoors. From a seed gifted by your cousin, passed along like a secret handshake. You ask if anyone's eaten one. No one knows, or no one will say. You sit alone one night, the fire down to its bitter breath. You look out your own window, just glass and the dark behind it. You wonder if your cousin is still awake, whispering, warming, listening. The rash starts in the place most inconvenient, just behind your left knee, where it rubs with every step and mocks your attempts at dignity. You try ignoring it, but it itches like sin and spreads like gossip. You scratch until the fabric pills into tiny knots, and the skin beneath feels like scorched bark, and still, it itches. Your cousin swears it's the wool. Your neighbor insists it's fleas. The local apothecary, who has all the charm of a moldy boot, claims it's heat of the blood and recommends fasting or bathing. You forget which. Either sounds unpleasant. What you remember is what he presses into your hand. A lump of something red, juicy, and disturbingly familiar. He calls it miraculous. You call it a tomato, though you're not sure if you're allowed to anymore. It has become more than food. It's a character now, mysterious, smug, and vaguely threatening. People whisper that it came from across the sea, but also possibly from beneath it. They say it's neither fruit nor vegetable, but something in between, like an insult wrapped in a salad. Still, the rash itches, and you are very tired. You go home and slice the thing open, marveling at how little it resembles anything you trust. The seeds glisten like it's smiling at you. You scoop the pulp with 2 fingers and smear it onto your leg, wincing at the cold. It feels like rubbing mashed guilt into your skin. Slippery, acidic, and immediately regrettable. The smell follows you around the cottage, clinging to the air like an unwanted guest. You try not to breathe through your nose. At first, there's a numbing coolness, and you foolishly believe in miracles. Then it starts to sting. You sit very still and contemplate the choices that have led to this moment, most of which involve listening to men who store herbs in their armpits and call it science. By midday, the rash is not gone, but it has company. A red raised welt blossoms around the tomato smear, shaped suspiciously like Italy. You feel betrayed and also geographically mocked. Your mother tells you it's your fault for trusting those soft-skinned foreign things. She doesn't specify whether she means the apothecaries or the tomatoes. Either way, you're banned from the stew pot for the week and told to sleep in the hayloft until the smell wears off. You protest, but your goat agrees with her. He snorts when you walk past and refuses to meet your eyes. The hayloft is worse than you remember. It's full of the kind of cold that gets into your teeth and takes up permanent residence. The itch becomes a companion. You scratch until your leg sounds like parchment being crumpled. The tomato smell, now sour and ominous, seems to grow in strength every time you shift. You dream of fields full of red orbs with eyes. You wake up and swear off both medicine and vegetables. In the village, the fad spreads faster than the rash did. Someone claims they rubbed tomato on a boil and it disappeared. Someone else swears it cured a stubborn cough. Another uses it to polish pewter, and while that part is strangely effective, it doesn't inspire culinary confidence. You see a man rub a slice on his forehead to banish demons. You do not ask questions. You just walk faster. You pass a woman at market who's selling jars of crushed tomato labeled balm for melancholia. You suspect it's just last week's stew with ambition. She offers you a sample. You decline, citing unresolved trauma and also common sense. You buy a cabbage instead. It doesn't promise miracles. It promises gas and chewing, and somehow that feels more honest. At home, you try to return to normal life, but the tomato's betrayal lingers. The goat still sniffs you warily. Your cousin laughs every time you limp past. The rash fades, slowly, but the welt remains, a reminder of misplaced faith and fruit-based regret. You now refer to your knee as the lesson. You consider drawing a tiny angry face on the spot, just so people know not to trust it. You stop visiting the apothecary. Instead, you take your complaints to the well, where at least the water doesn't make medical claims. You soak your foot and grumble to the wind, which listens more politely than most villagers. Somewhere in the distance, someone sneezes, and you imagine a new folk remedy forming as you sit. The world feels as though it's shifting again. People are whispering about natural cures, and suddenly everyone's a healer. A man swears garlic in your shoe will fix your back. A woman offers to wave leeks over your forehead. You nod politely and walk away, your steps careful, your eyes scanning for tomatoes. You begin to notice them everywhere, not the red globes themselves, but their influence. A neighbor insists her eyesight improved after eating one. Her cat immediately walks into a wall. A child says tomatoes make you run faster. He then falls into a pond while demonstrating. Someone else claims they balance the humors, though no one explains what that actually means. You suspect it involves bleeding. You remain unconvinced. There's a softness to the tomato that unnerves you. It bruises too easily. It splits open with the least provocation. It's a food that seems designed to be betrayed. You miss hard vegetables, root things, carrots, beets, even onions, which hurt you emotionally but never physically. A tomato can smile at you one minute and stain your tunic the next. It's like trusting a gossip with soup-like tendencies. Still, the curiosity lingers. You catch yourself watching your cousin from across the yard as she slices one open and sprinkles it with salt. She eats it raw, eyes closed, like she's praying. You try to look away, but the crunch echoes in your ear. It sounds dangerous and a little interesting. You dab at your scar absent-mindedly and try to forget. By the week's end, the village healer's boy begins selling tomato pulp in clay pots. He wears a hat now. He calls himself a potion merchant. You consider reporting him to someone, but the church is already busy arguing about whether tomatoes are pagan, cursed, or possibly French. No one agrees, except that they're definitely not trustworthy. You throw your cabbage into the stew and try not to think about how bland it is. You add salt, then herbs, then a scrap of dried carrot. Nothing helps. You stare at your cousin's plate across the table. Hers is red, rich, fragrant, suspicious. She catches you staring. She raises an eyebrow. She offers you a spoon. You shake your head, but the scent follows you all evening. Later, alone by the fire, you sniff your sleeve and frown. It still smells faintly of tomato, faintly of shame. You consider burning it, but it's your only winter tunic, and regret isn't as warm as wool. You go to bed itchy, haunted, and oddly hungry. Somewhere outside, a tomato vine creaks in the wind, like it knows it has time. And deep beneath your blanket, under the weight of scratchy linen and stubborn pride, you begin to wonder what it would taste like roasted. Just a little. Maybe with garlic. Maybe tomorrow. But first, there is the matter of green ones, unripe, unknown. suspiciously quiet, and possibly planning something. The chill of the night settles into your bones as the thoughts drift with you, slow and uneasy, toward whatever waits next in the stew pot of life. And sleep, when it finally comes, smells faintly of ash, wool, and something red you still don't trust. But soon, you will taste it again. The scar on the back of your knee has almost faded, though not completely. It lingers like a memory that still hasn't apologized. And while the welt has settled into something less dramatic, it itches occasionally, usually when someone nearby mentions tomatoes in a tone that sounds too cheerful for your liking. You've avoided them for days now, patting your stew with extra cabbage and leaning heavily into turnips as if they might absolve you. But guilt has a flavor, and it's red and tangy, and it wafts in again this morning through the open shutters, disguised as something new. You don't mean to sniff the air, but it finds you anyway. Something is frying, something familiar, something suspect. The scent trails across the courtyard like a rumor, oily, herbal, and warm in a way that implies comfort, though you know better. Comfort is usually bait, and bait smells like garlic and breading and desperation, sizzling in a pan that's been passed through too many hands to trace. You sit on the edge of your stool and pretend not to notice, but the smell knows. It curls beneath the door, lifts the edge of your tunic, and whispers to your stomach like it's owed a favor. Your cousin is to blame. She's humming again, always a bad sign, as if trying to convince herself that what she's doing is perfectly reasonable, that she hasn't sliced something green and forbidden and dredged it in flour like some kind of culinary blasphemer. You peek into the pan with a disapproval you hope looks stern. The slices sizzle in oil with the confidence of things that have no business looking that golden. They puff at the edges like they know they're winning. The smell betrays you. It slides down your spine and settles in the hollows of your ribs like a dare. You sit back down, but it's too late. The idea has entered the room. The first bite is the worst, because it's good. Not good like salvation or poetry. Good like something you'd find in a dream and regret by morning. The crunch is soft, but decisive. The inside, warm and slightly sour, burns the edges of your trust. It's too tender, too flavorful. It tastes like a lie. You chew slowly, as if suspicion might protect you from poison. You look around for witnesses, but the goat is sleeping, and the walls, thankfully, cannot judge. Your cousin offers another slice, and you hesitate just long enough to pretend you still have principles. Then you take it, with both hands. You don't thank her. She doesn't expect it. Later, you try to rationalize it to yourself. They were green, after all. Green is unripe. Unripe means safe, like pears so hard they double as weapons. Green means neutral, unaligned. It doesn't feel like a betrayal if the tomato never had a chance to ripen into evil. You repeat this mantra to yourself with every bite. But the seeds are still there, and so is the juice. Thicker than it should be. They bleed when you press them with your fork, like they're pretending not to be ripe when they absolutely are. Your third slice looks smug. You eat it anyway. And with it, your dignity. You try to resist the urge to mop up the oil with a crust of bread. You fail. The worst part isn't how much you enjoy it. The worst part is how quickly it disappears. You stare at the empty plate and feel abandoned. Your stomach feels betrayed by your principles. Your soul feels betrayed by your stomach. Your tunic now smells faintly of garlic and moral compromise. You scrape at the pan with the corner of your bread and call it cleaning. Your cousin pretends not to notice. The guilt catches up in the evening. You lie on your straw mat and feel it settle behind your eyes like a headache made of flavor. You curl into yourself, itchy again, but not on your leg this time, deeper. A spiritual itch, like something in you has been nourished without consent. You think of the apothecary's paste, of that cold, wet feeling sliding across your rash. You think of the sneezing boy at market and the tomato-peddling potion merchant. You think of the priest's warning about temptation and the woman who waved a tomato slice like a relic before fainting from hunger. And now here you are, licking the corner of your thumb and wondering if there are any left. You swear you'll never do it again, which means you will, just not immediately. You need time, distance, a few bad meals to remind you who you are. You reach beneath your blanket and curl your toes in the hay, trying to forget. The blanket smells like smoke and linen and a little bit of cooked regret. It's better than raw shame, but not by much. The next morning, your cousin tries to hand you another slice. You wave her off with a frown and a muttered excuse about digestion. But by mid-morning, you're standing near the pan again, not asking, just hovering. She doesn't offer. This is your punishment. You drink water and chew a beet and pretend it's fine. It isn't. Later, the goat knocks over a pot. You blame the tomato smell. He looks unimpressed. The neighbor's boy throws up in the field after eating a raw one and says it tasted like curses. You nod gravely and try not to burp garlic. As the day wears on, the craving fades, but the shame deepens. You whisper a prayer to whichever saint governs appetite and treachery. You vow to fast. Then you nibble on the edge of a leftover crust with tomato residue and call it research. That night, your dreams are quiet. No talking tomatoes, no vines creeping through the shutters. Just the faint, oily memory of something golden and hot. You wake up a little hungry. You don't admit why. You build the morning fire slowly, letting your hands linger over the warmth like it might absolve you. You press your heel against the floorboards, which are still cold and slightly sticky from where the pan splattered. You refuse to wipe it up. Let the floor remember your downfall. At breakfast, there's only porridge. You pretend to enjoy it. You stir slowly, like someone who's seen too much. Outside, the garden glistens with dew and suspicion. The vines are growing again. One has reached the fence. Another leans toward the goat pen like it's trying to start a conversation. You stare at them, these green, not quite fruits, these symbols of something too complex for stew. You don't pick them today, but you also don't pull them up. You say it's because of the soil, or the weather, or the vague superstition that things planted on a Thursday are harder to kill. But deep down, you suspect the tomatoes are waiting. And worse, so are you. And as the sun dips low and the air grows thick with cooking fires and the faint smell of something pan-fried on someone else's hearth, you catch yourself turning your head, just slightly, toward the scent. But you say nothing. You chew your turnip and feel the betrayal settle quietly into your bones. And somewhere between shame and hunger, the next craving begins. You thought you had control. That was your first mistake. There's a comfort in repetition, the way you peel the parsnips with the blade you've honed for 10 winters, the way your thumb naturally avoids the nicks in the wooden cutting board, the way you layer the root vegetables like layers of apology for a stew that never really changes. A little broth, some barley, an onion if fortune has smiled. You even allow yourself a dash of dried thyme this time. A luxury shaken from the bottom of a clay pot that smells faintly of damp and ambition. It's your stew. You make it. You know what goes into it. You've been making it since your teeth could chew it and your arms could lift the pot. You trust it the way you trust wool to itch or goats to disapprove of your choices. But today, something is off. You feel it before you taste it. That unplaceable sense. Like someone's moved your boots a few inches to the left, and now nothing sits quite right in your bones. The pot burbles low over the hearth, the same hearth that's seen you through sick winters and undercooked ambitions. But there's something in the scent, something tangy, something sharp, something red where no red should be. You try to blame the time. Maybe it turned. Maybe the onion was old and dramatic. But you know better. You lean closer, nose inches above the steam, and there it is. That acidic tease. That sun-soaked scent that doesn't belong anywhere near barley. You didn't put tomatoes in this. You're sure of it. You would remember. They're not the sort of ingredient you add lightly, like salt or family grudges. They come with consequences, with opinions, with texture. Still, you stir, slowly, cautiously, like your ladle might unearth a confession. And it does. Software slippery. Just beneath a chunk of turnip and a half-dissolved bean, you see it. A sliver. Shiny. Red. You freeze. It does not. It drifts upward like it owns the pot. You prod it. It squishes. It leaks suspicion. There's more. Not many. Just enough to ruin the sense of order you'd spent the morning pretending to have. You fish one out. It jiggles slightly, like it has opinions about your technique. You drop it onto a scrap of cloth and stare at it the way you'd stare at an unfamiliar footprint outside your door. It stares back. Your cousin denies everything, of course. She's on the other side of the room pretending to churn something that definitely doesn't need churning. She hums again. You make a mental note to never trust that sound again. The goat offers no help. He just licks the wall and sighs. You think about discarding the whole pot. A bold move. Wasteful, yes, but morally satisfying. The idea of upending the entire stew into the fire gives you a thrill. But then you think of your hunger, and the cold, and the way your stomach curls when you go to bed on brothless regret. So you eat it. Slowly. You avoid the red bits at first, like dodging insults at a family gathering. But they find you, hiding between beans and shame. They collapse on the tongue in that mushy way that speaks of overripe fruit and overstepped boundaries. You chew. You swallow. You continue. The worst part is, it's not terrible. The stew has depth today. Richness. A low hum of something you didn't plan for. You hate it. You hate how it lingers. How it makes your usual flavors seem shallow and flat. You hate how it makes you want more. You blame your cousin. You blame the neighbor who traded you the suspicious basket of mixed vegetables earlier this week. You blame yourself, a little, for letting the pot out of your sight. By the time the bowl is empty, you've stopped pretending you don't know. You wipe your spoon clean like you're erasing evidence, but your stomach already knows what you've done. Later, when the fire dies down and you tuck the pot away under the cloth that still smells like onion and guilt, you tell yourself you'll be more careful next time, that you'll guard the ingredients, that you'll watch the pot, that you'll reassert control. But something's shifted. It's not just in the stew. It's in the way you look at the remaining vegetables. The way your hand hesitates over the carrot and hovers just a second longer near the sack of wrinkled tomatoes someone left near the hearth, claiming they were for the pigs. You don't feed them to the pigs. Not yet. You place them beside the pot, just in case. The air grows damp as night presses in. The wind fingers through the cracks in the walls, tugging at your blanket, teasing your ankles. You burrow deeper and feel the warmth of the stew still settled somewhere in your chest, betraying you with its quiet satisfaction. And as the night deepens and the goat snores and your cousin mumbles something about taste and treason in her sleep, you think about the next stew. You wonder what would happen if you didn't look away this time. And just before sleep takes you, you swear you can smell tomatoes. Again. The stew is gone. That much is clear. It left behind the usual trail of greasy bowls, stained spoons, and the slow, gurgling regret that settles just beneath your ribs and lingers there like a guest who doesn't know when to leave. You scraped the pot clean. You chewed carefully. You ignored the soft red intruders, even as they squished between your teeth like ripe suspicion. You told yourself this was the last time. You made promises to your stomach, to your cousin, even to the goat, who only blinked at you as if he'd seen worse, and likely had. Now the fire is low. The blanket is thin. The wind is still rude and intrusive, crawling under the door like it pays rent. But none of it is new. What's new is what's waiting for you in your sleep. You slide under the wool that smells faintly of damp moss and unwashed decisions, tucking yourself into the same lump of straw that's been steadily flattening for the last 3 years. You curl one leg over the warmer patch, then shift again, because a mysterious lump insists on being part of your spine tonight. You sigh into the wool, into the dark, into the goat's low, judgmental breathing, and then you drift. It starts quietly, the way most strange dreams do. At first, you're just walking, nothing dramatic. Just the usual trudging through mud that feels like it's been personally insulted by your boots. But even here, in the murky soup of your unconscious mind, something is off. The mud is red, not the brown red of clay, not the rust red of old iron. No, this red is bright, shiny, and slightly smug. You look down. The mud squelches between your toes like mashed pulp. It smells like acid and confusion. You try to step out of it, but every path leads you deeper. The fields tilt sideways. The fences bend like they've overheard a secret. Off in the distance, a cow moos in Latin. You're not fluent, but you know judgment when you hear it. The trees are full of them. Tomatoes, fat, overripe, dangling like heavy gossip from skeletal branches that were never meant to bear fruit. They sway in the windless air, watching, always watching. One drops beside you with a wet splut. It doesn't bounce. You walk faster. The mud grows stickier, your legs heavier, your thoughts slower. You reach for something, anything familiar. A gate, a shed, a sympathetic potato. But the world is reshaping itself in shades of crimson. Your house appears, but it's not quite right. It leans. It pulses slightly. The walls glisten as if sweating seeds. You enter because dreams are cruel that way. Inside, the furniture is made of tomato vines. The fire hisses with roasted skins. The goat is wearing a bonnet and won't meet your eyes. On the table, your table, is a bowl. A large bowl. You know what's inside before you see it. It bubbles thickly, red and unrepentant. Slices float to the top like memories you tried to forget. You lean in, unable to stop yourself. The scent is warm, familiar, almost inviting, like betrayal, if betrayal were simmered over low heat and seasoned with salt and a hint of oregano. Then it speaks. The tomato, it speaks. Its voice is the voice of every bad idea you've ever had. Software smug, unavoidable. It says your name, not loudly, just enough to make your spine sweat. You wake with your heart pounding and your mouth dry, the taste of imaginary pulp still clinging to your tongue like something you might never truly scrub away. The blanket is twisted around your legs like a passive-aggressive snake. The fire is out. The goat is snoring. Your cousin mumbles something about pickles and redemption. You stare at the rafters and wonder if you'll ever eat again. Of course you will, because the body forgets. By midday, the hunger creeps in. You catch yourself sniffing the air for stew that doesn't exist. You glance at the basket of vegetables with casual suspicion. You pick at a crust of bread like it might reveal a secret. The dream still clings to you. The sound of pulp squelching. The way the tomato knew your name. You shake it off. Pretend it never happened. But the moment you close your eyes again, you know it will return. Red, warm, and full of seeds. It's the kind of morning where the fog doesn't rise so much as sulk along the ground. Dampness clings to your tunic, creeping into your joints with the persistence of someone who doesn't know they're not welcome. The fire barely survived the night. It left behind a few loyal embers huddled together like pensioners trying to recall warmth. You prod them with a stick that might once have been part of a broom, but now just seems like a splinter waiting to happen. You are not rested. You are not well fed. You are, in fact, none of the things that might make a day feel promising. And yet, today you've been summoned. An important word that carries with it the heavy scent of obligation and whatever your cousin's feet have been fermenting under the table. Word came through a courier who looked far too pleased with himself for someone wearing stockings held up by twine. Something about a nobleman, something about a tasting, something about your cousin's tomatoes. The ones you have very specifically tried to avoid touching, eating, dreaming about, or acknowledging in polite company. But now it seems you must accompany your cousin to the manor grounds, where someone with too many teeth and even more coin has decided to make an event of this. You had other plans for today, like sulking or picking straw out of your underclothes, but apparently destiny has different ideas. You trudge the path behind your cousin, who's wearing their market best, which mostly means the tunic with fewer holes and only one visible stain. They carry a basket of the enemy in their arms. You try not to look too closely. The tomatoes glisten as if they know what's coming, as if they're smug. The manor house appears on the hill like a judgmental pastry, all decorative and unnecessary. Windows the size of cowsheds, columns that don't appear to support anything, and a garden trimmed so precisely it seems to be suffering from some kind of aesthetic anxiety. You're ushered in by someone whose shoes are shinier than your dreams. They don't speak to you exactly. They speak near you, as though your presence is more of a suggestion than a fact. Inside, everything smells like candle wax, aged cheese, and the sort of scented oils only people who don't chop wood can afford to enjoy. You're seated on a bench that feels too narrow for comfort, but too wide for dignity. The nobleman enters with the slow, deliberate pace of someone who's never been late to anything, because time waits for him. His coat is embroidered with thread so fine you're not sure whether to admire it or pluck it for weaving. His beard is curled like ambition. His shoes probably have their own servants. He picks up a tomato, just picks it up. No hesitation, no squinting, no sniffing. He bites, right into it. You flinch as if he's gnawed the edge of a loaded crossbow. Your cousin holds their breath. The room, or at least the parts of it not covered in velvet, seems to lean forward. He chews, he swallows, he licks his lips, and then he smiles. The words come out like an incantation. Delicious, he says. You've heard that word before. It's what people say about food that doesn't fight back, about warm bread or berries not picked too early. You've never heard it applied to danger, to suspicion, to something that once stared at you in a dream and whispered secrets you swore to forget. Your cousin beams. The servants nod as if the king himself just approved of the son. A steward takes notes. Someone else claps. There is talk of cultivation, of sharing seeds, of expanding gardens and menus. There is a bubbling excitement, the kind that usually precedes a terrible idea. You sit there, surrounded by nobles who are now describing tomatoes as robust and versatile, and you begin to feel unmoored, like someone has tugged the reality rug from beneath your calloused feet. A tomato, delicious. You heard it with your own ears, which you briefly considered donating to someone else. On the way home, your cousin is radiant, practically glowing, which only adds to your concern. They talk about future plans, about recipes, about sauces and salting methods, and whether they should write something down in case posterity forgets. You are deeply, profoundly tired. The road home seems longer. The sky hangs lower. Every bush now looks like it's plotting a harvest. You swear one tomato in the basket winked at you. At dinner, you sit silently while your cousin adds just a few slices to the barley mash. The tomato steams. It bleeds a little. You consider refusing the bowl. You consider faking illness. You consider moving to a mountain and eating only moss. But instead, you eat. Slowly, carefully. It's warm, slightly sweet, with a strange depth, like it knows something about you that it shouldn't. You push the bowl away before finishing. Your cousin doesn't ask why. Later, as you sit by the fire picking at a blister on your thumb, the goat comes to rest beside you, his eyes full of an ancient weariness that mirrors your own. You nod at him. He huffs. And somewhere, across the hills, in some grand dining hall lined with polished silver and embroidered hangings, a nobleman is probably ordering seconds of tomatoes. You lie down that night with a tight knot in your stomach. It might be hunger. It might be dread. The dreams come slowly, red-tinted and murmuring. And far off, you sense the approach of something even worse. Someone's putting them on bread next. You never expected betrayal to arrive dressed as lunch. It's late afternoon when you shuffle into the courtyard, feet thick with mud that isn't entirely yours. The sky has folded itself into a damp gray pocket above you, and everything smells like rain that decided not to fall, but lingered just enough to ruin the washing. Your tunic clings in all the wrong places. There's a crease at the base of your spine from that one poorly carved stool you dared to nap on. And someone, probably the neighbor with too many opinions and not enough teeth, has let the goats wander again. One of them is chewing something red and smug-looking behind the compost heap. You make a mental note to report both the goat and the neighbor to someone, though you're not sure who that someone is. Perhaps the sky. Inside the kitchen, the hearth is low, sulking in the ashes like a grumpy old man refusing to leave a party. The coals are trying, but even they seem to understand what's happened here. Your cousin is humming, which is never a good sign. Happiness in this house usually means someone has misunderstood something, and you'll pay for it later. You glance at the table. Something is off. There's a loaf of bread, not unusual, except that it looks recently baked. Not chipped, not damp, not rescued from a spider colony behind the flour barrel. It has a golden crust that suggests optimism. This is your first warning. Bread in this house is never optimistic. Then, beside it, a small ceramic bowl, glazed. Probably not yours. Inside, a slick sheen of oil, reflecting light as if it knows what it's doing. And in the middle, sliced tomatoes, thin slices, arranged like a painter's mistake, red as guilt, glinting with oil, sprinkled with, you lean closer, basil. Basil. You didn't even know you had basil. Is that what that weed was? The one growing near the outhouse that the goat always sniffs suspiciously? Your cousin leans over the table and places a slice of tomato on a piece of bread, drizzles oil like they're conducting a rite. They chew. They chew as though this is normal, as though this is a reasonable thing to do to bread. You look away, as if catching someone reading aloud from a love letter. Your stomach makes a sound, not out of hunger, out of disbelief. Later, because it always happens later, you find yourself alone in the kitchen. The basil has wilted. The oil has congealed slightly in the bowl. The bread is still soft. And the tomatoes, they sit there, innocent and sliced, as though they weren't part of a global culinary conspiracy. You tell yourself it's only a bite, a scientific endeavor, a test. No one will know, except the goat, who is watching through the doorway with the judgment of 1,000 ancestors. The bread gives easily beneath your fingers. The tomato doesn't resist. The oil clings, warm and fragrant. You close your eyes when you bite because it feels indecent, and the world tilts, just slightly, enough to notice. It's not the sweetness of the tomato. It's the way it seeps into the bread, the way the oil smooths the edges, the way the basil does something to your memory, like a forgotten melody from childhood, or that one time your feet were actually warm in bed. Your body doesn't recoil. It leans forward. You take another bite, and then sit down, because standing feels too much like rebellion, and you've already betrayed yourself once today. The goat saunters in and sniffs the table. You both understand this moment is private, sacred, shameful. The next morning, you think about it. Not all day, but enough. During chores, while fetching water, while sweeping the corner where the wind deposits all the dirt that's definitely not yours. The taste lingers. You try to scrub it from your tongue with boiled oats, but they're no match. You even chew a handful of bitter roots from behind the shed, but your mouth remains haunted. By lunch, your cousin is slicing again. You pretend not to care. You pretend to be interested in the status of your neighbor's roof, which is collapsing in a manner that's almost spiritual. But then, the smell catches your nose. The tomato, the oil, the basil. Your stomach growls, not like a beast, like a song. And so you eat. Again, you tell yourself it's practical. There's food. It's edible. There's no law against it. Yet. And anyway, you've already survived worse. Remember the cabbage soup with turnip broth? You do. And so does your digestive system. But as you chew, you start to notice things. Your cousin smiling. The goat more affectionate. The room slightly warmer. Or perhaps it's just the oil coating the inside of your throat, tricking your body into thinking life is manageable. Either way, you sit longer than usual after the meal. You feel, dare you admit it, comforted, which is obviously a trap. Because comfort means lowering your defenses. It means letting something inside. And tomatoes, you're certain, are not to be trusted. You spend the next few days avoiding the kitchen. You fake chores. You invent errands. You develop a sudden, irrational need to reorganize the storage pit. But the tomatoes wait. They're patient, like rot. On the fourth evening, you find yourself staring at a piece of crust. It's dry. It was once bread. You eat it anyway. But it's missing something. You go to bed hungry that night. Not for food, for betrayal, for that strange warmth that tomato on bread seemed to deliver directly to your bones. You dream of it. Again. In the dream, the bread is endless. The tomato slices hover like saints. The oil is poured from the hands of someone who doesn't work, who never worked, and whose fingernails are suspiciously clean. You wake with crumbs on your face. Later, while sweeping the front step, the neighbor passes by. She nods toward your window, says something about smelling basil, smiles with too many teeth, walks on. You feel exposed. You go back inside and find your cousin has left another plate. A slice of bread, a few coins on the side, a sprig of basil. You sit, you eat, you chew slowly, thoughtfully. The goat lays its head on your foot. The sun sets through the smudged window glass, and outside, the world doesn't tilt anymore. It simply turns, softly, like a page in a cookbook you didn't mean to read. It starts with the smell, not the alarming sour scent of a tomato left too long on a windowsill, not the grassy sting of one freshly sliced, still leaking its secrets across a cutting board that already smells faintly of regret. No, this is something deeper, richer, something that clings to the fabric of your tunic and softens your suspicion before your brain has time to interfere. It slinks through the air like an apology wrapped in steam, an unfamiliar warmth, a softness that has nothing to do with the hearth, which is crackling dutifully in the corner and refusing, as always, to be thanked for its labor. The kitchen is humid, not unpleasantly so, just enough to make the tips of your fingers stick together as you fumble with a wooden spoon that's seen too many winters. The pot bubbles gently, an old iron cauldron whose bottom is warped from a lifetime of misunderstandings. Your cousin stirs the stew like someone performing a sacred rite, slow, deliberate, with the kind of focus you usually reserve for deciding whether your boots are too damp to risk wearing again. There's garlic in the air, and onions, and beneath it all, like a whisper with terrible posture, the unmistakable scent of cooked tomato. You do not run. You do not hurl the pot into the yard and scream. You simply sit on the bench nearest the fire and let your joints groan their usual complaint. The cat, having sensed you've accepted your fate, curls around your foot and purrs like it's mocking you, which, in all likelihood, it is. You haven't said it aloud, not to anyone, not even to the goat, who is the only one you trust with your most shameful confessions. But a thought has been blooming, slow and fungus-like, in the corner of your mind. Perhaps they're not entirely evil. at least not when softened over flame and drowned in flavor. You're still suspicious, of course. That much hasn't changed. But you're beginning to understand that suspicion and surrender can coexist, like lice and peasants. You don't have to like it. You just have to endure it. The stew is ladled into your bowl with a flourish that implies your cousin believes they're doing something revolutionary. The spoon clinks against the rim. You stare into the red depths. You can see them there. Pieces of tomato, no longer round and menacing, but slumped and indistinct, like tired soldiers retreating into the embrace of beans and broth. You pick up your spoon, slowly, as though speed might reawaken their malevolence. It's hot. Of course it's hot. Your tongue regrets your impatience, but the flavor lingers even after the burn fades. There's garlic, sweet, mellowed into submission. There's thyme, which you're sure no one actually planted, yet always seems to grow near the latrine. And then, at the very end, beneath the comfort and the salt and the heat, there's the tomato. It's fine. No, it's more than that. But you refuse to say so. You chew with the solemn dignity of someone confronting their own hypocrisy and deciding to live with it. The texture is yielding. The acidity has gone quiet. The color, while still vaguely threatening, has lost its sharpness. It looks like something you might serve without a disclaimer. Your cousin watches you from the corner, pretending to oil a hinge that doesn't need oiling. You ignore them. You have more important things to wrestle with. Like the second bowl you're considering. You finish the first. And then, with all the reluctance of a man confessing his sins to a tree stump, you refill your bowl. You sit back down. The cat adjusts its position. You chew. You swallow. The fire crackles. The goat chews on something unidentifiable in the yard. You feel nourished, which is its own kind of betrayal. You once believed tomatoes were like curses, best avoided, never spoken of. Now, you find yourself contemplating them in your stew the way you contemplate a neighbor's questionable haircut. You don't love it. You wouldn't choose it. But you've seen worse, and you'll allow it to exist so long as it doesn't spread. The next day, the leftover stew is thicker, better. You suspect sorcery, but you ladle it anyway. You chew slowly. The tomatoes have all but disintegrated, absorbed into the broth like regrets into a quiet evening. You taste warmth. You taste time. You taste balance. That evening you overhear someone at the well muttering about the red fruit that heals if boiled, kills if raw. You smirk behind your sleeve. It's not healing anything but your pride, and your pride is stubborn. You consider telling your neighbor, the one who once refused to let a tomato cross her threshold without a prayer and a salt circle. But you remember how she reacts to mold and full moons, and you let the secret stay curled inside your chest like a warm coal. By the third pot, it's become a pattern. You now add them intentionally, tentatively, yes, but with your own hands. You peel, you chop, you throw them into the pot and stir with a resigned kind of reverence, the way you stir laundry into the river, or insults into your cousin's tea. You still don't eat them raw. That line holds. But cooked is different. Cooked is soft edges. Cooked is a truce. Cooked is the smell that clings to your tunic long after the dishes have been scraped and the fire has burned down to embers. Cooked is what survival tastes like when you're too tired to be angry anymore. One night, while tending the fire and pretending not to cry from smoke and existential dread, you realize you're not thinking about whether tomatoes are evil. You're thinking about whether you have enough garlic left for tomorrow. The shift is so subtle you almost miss it. You haven't forgiven them. Not entirely, but you've begun to accommodate them, which in some ways is worse. Because once you make space, even a little space, for something you once feared, something you once cursed from rooftops and lectured the chickens about, it becomes harder to tell yourself you were right to be afraid. Harder still to admit how much energy went into hating something that now tastes vaguely like comfort and time. You lie in bed that night, the smell of dinner still clinging to your sleeves. The mattress hasn't gotten any softer. The wind still finds the crack in the wall near your shoulder, but your belly is warm, full, at peace. Almost. You turn onto your side. The cat relocates to your back. The goat thumps against the door outside in some dream of its own. You breathe in, deeply. You exhale. You think of tomatoes, not as threats, but as ingredients. And just as sleep begins to settle over your limbs like an overly affectionate blanket, you think, perhaps tomorrow you'll try growing them, but only in the back garden, where no one can see, and where, if they betray you again, at least the compost won't have far to go. It happens quietly, the way most dangerous things do. One moment you're tossing kitchen scraps into the compost heap with the indifference of someone who's made peace with the damp rot of life. And the next, you're staring at something green and deliberate sprouting where the peelings used to be. A little stem, too upright to be a weed, too confident to be ignored. You squint at it, rub the sleep from your eyes using a sleeve that smells like onion and regret, and crouch closer. It's a tomato plant, or at least it will be. You do not tell anyone, not yet. Not even the goat, who you suspect already knows. The goat knows everything and forgives nothing. Instead, you begin to water it, casually, like you're only doing it because the kettle had extra, or because the sky didn't bother to rain, or because the earth looked dry and a little pathetic. But in truth, you're already invested. You're watching it the way people watch the first flame catch in a stubborn hearth, wondering if it'll take or betray them. You hate how much hope is involved. It's exhausting. Each morning, you check on it before you've even rubbed your knees or cursed the weather. You pretend you're just looking at the sky. You pretend you're just stretching your back. But your eyes always drift toward that small patch of soil near the fence, where weeds have politely stepped aside and something green has taken root with the kind of quiet resilience you never trusted in yourself. And then, somehow, it becomes plural. Leaves, branches, blossoms. You did not ask for this. You did not sign up for a miracle garden. But the tomatoes have taken your apathy as encouragement, and now you're forced to reckon with their optimism. They grow like they believe in something, like they haven't read the village records, like they don't know what happens to things that try too hard around here. Your neighbor notices. Of course she does. She's got the vision of a hawk and the subtlety of a goat with indigestion. You feel her gaze before you hear her voice. You do not turn. You do not answer. But you know what she's thinking. You're thinking it too. You're growing them. On purpose. And you're not even wearing gloves. At first, the fruit is small and green and hard as your cousin's sense of humor. But over time, they soften. They deepen. They begin to blush with that unmistakable hue. Bright, smug, and unapologetic. You pluck one when no one's looking. You hold it in your palm like a stolen truth, smooth and cool, with a little give beneath the skin. It smells like sunlight and unfinished thoughts. You carry it inside and sit with it at the table for longer than you're proud of, unsure whether to eat it or ask it for advice. Eventually, you slice it. Not with ceremony, not with salt or reverence. Just a knife, a board, and a cautious hand. The inside is ridiculous. Seeds and slime and a structure that seems designed specifically to cause mistrust. You eat it anyway, slowly, as if the tomato might notice your hesitation and change its mind about being edible. It doesn't. It's good. Infuriatingly so. You consider telling someone. You consider pretending it was an accident. But the truth hangs in the air like smoke from a damp log. You wanted this. You grew this. And it didn't kill you. Which is, frankly, suspicious. More sprout. You start tying them up with twine and sticks, like prisoners you can't quite let roam free. You water them at dawn, before the village stirs. before the world has a chance to notice your treason. You mulch them with straw and prayer. You whisper things under your breath. Not sweet nothings, not exactly, but vague grumblings about soil pH and cloud cover and how ridiculous it is to be emotionally manipulated by fruit. The goat eyes the plants like she's waiting for them to confess. The cat occasionally bats at the vines, but never with conviction. Your cousin starts putting slices in stew without asking. You don't protest. You chew. You nod. The bowl is scraped clean. By now, the smell of tomato lives in your kitchen, in your fingers, in the folds of your tunic. It's not unpleasant. It's just present. It's the background hum of your day, the punctuation at the end of your meals, the ghost that lives in your cooking pot. You do not mind it. That might be the most disturbing part. When autumn leans in, with its brittle mornings and fog-dampened firewood, you harvest the last of them. They're heavy in your apron, more than you expected, more than you deserve. You lay them out on the table and stare at them like they're a riddle. Some are misshapen, some are split. All of them are yours. You make sauce. Because what else is there to do when the world gives you tomatoes and the days start dying? It simmers for hours, fills the house with something so warm and earthy that even your grumpy neighbor pauses by the window to sniff. You pretend not to notice. You ladle it into jars. You burn your thumb. You curse. Quietly. Dinner that night is simple. Just bread and sauce and the kind of silence that feels full, not awkward. You eat slowly. You listen to the fire. You catch your cousin licking the bowl and pretend not to see. You wonder how it happened. Not the growing. That part was sun and water and reluctant tending. No. You wonder how your hatred wore away, not with a bang, but with a series of meals and mornings and moments where the tomatoes didn't betray you. You lie in bed that night, the last chapter of the season pressed gently against the roof beams, and your chest alike. Outside, the vines wilt under the weight of the coming cold. Inside, your hands still smell faintly of crushed leaves and something that might be forgiveness. You did not plan this. You did not want this. But you grew them, on purpose. And the part of you that still clings to superstition, still sleeps with a salt pouch beneath your pillow, still crosses yourself at owls, waits for punishment. It does not come. Instead, you sleep, and everything smells faintly of tomato,